Just then, they stopped at the base of a wide stone stairway. Above, a figure turned toward them, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Lady Galadriel. Eric caught her gaze for the briefest moment, and for that moment, his mind went blissfully blank. Beautiful, serene, regal. No words fit her better. Lady Galadriel, Gandalf said with uncharacteristic solemnity, bowing deeply. Time may have changed me, but it has not touched the Lady of Lothlorien. He turned to Elrond, lifting an eyebrow. You didn't tell me she'd be here. She wasn't invited by me, Elrond replied. A voice like polished ice cut in from behind. That would be my doing. Gandalf's smile vanished like a puff of smoke. He turned, clearly reluctant, and bowed stiffly. Saruman. You've been busy, Mithrandir, said the White Wizard, casting a glance at Eric. Why is there a mortal here? It's late. If this doesn't concern him, perhaps he should return to his bed. Our counsel is not for common ears. He might as well have shoved Eric out with a broom. Eric is no ordinary man, Gandalf snapped. Some parts of this plan rest squarely on his shoulders. His strength is beyond what you can imagine. Is that so? Saruman replied, tone skeptical but eyes narrowed with interest. In truth, he'd felt it the moment he laid eyes on Eric. The man wasn't normal, but admitting that would mean agreeing with Gandalf and Saruman wasn't about to hand him that satisfaction. This, Elrond interrupted, is Eric, the Orc Bane of the Misty Mountains. Title gained, Bane of Orcs. The title had replaced Orc Slayer some time ago, when the orcs had begun retreating from their mountain strongholds. All present could, with a thought, recall his deeds. At that point, even Saruman couldn't keep up the pretense. Fine, he may stay. Lady Galadriel nodded at Eric and offered a gentle smile of welcome. He returned the gesture as Gandalf had, bowing respectfully. And so a White Council was convened. The Lady of Lothlorien, the Lord of Rivendell, the White Wizard of Isengard, the Grey Wanderer, and Eric. The dragon belongs to no side, Gandalf began, but if it aligns itself with the enemy, it could spell doom for all of Middle-earth. The enemy, Saruman cut in. Sauron is gone, the ring was lost to the sea, you're chasing shadows. Eric, leaning against a nearby pillar, glanced at him with a bemused smile but said nothing. At this stage, Saruman was merely arrogant, not yet a traitor. Still on the side of the Free Peoples, for now. We've had peace for nearly 4 centuries, Elrond added, agreeing for once with Saruman. Let's not risk that. Peace, Gandalf barked. Trolls are coming down from the hills, raiding farms and villages. Orcs roam the roads openly. Ask Eric how many he's killed just going for a walk. Elrond frowned. That still doesn't mean war is upon us. You're always trying to start fires where there's none, Saruman sniffed. It's not just the dragon, Gandalf pressed. There's something darker, more sinister stirring. You may not see it yet, but it sees us. As he spoke, Eric noticed Galadriel and Elrond had silently stepped to his side, standing behind Gandalf. They were showing their support, quietly but unmistakably. The stone table before them suddenly seemed skewed, 4 on one side and Saruman alone on the other. Saruman's jaw tightened. There is a necromancer, Gandalf continued, in Dol Guldur. He commands the dead. A petty sorcerer dabbling in tricks, Saruman waved him off. Hardly worth a counsel. But Gandalf wasn't listening anymore. He seemed distracted. No, he was silent, listening with his mind. The 3 elven ring-bearers, Galadriel, Elrond, and Gandalf, could communicate telepathically. Galadriel had clearly noticed the item Gandalf carried. Moments later, he laid it gently on the stone table. A sword. Morgul, she gave the faintest of smiles. When all of this is over, you're welcome to visit Lothlorien. You'd find it illuminating. There was a flicker of something more in her eyes, curiosity. For someone who had lived thousands of years, it wasn't often she encountered a future so veiled in blankness. When he visited the Golden Wood, she thought to herself, she would try the mirror. Thank you, Eric said sincerely, for your blessing. I'll come if fate allows. Galadriel nodded once more, and before Eric could blink again, her luminous presence had vanished, like sunlight retreating behind a veil. Eric! A voice called out below the steps. Eric turned to see an old man in a gray robe, hurrying toward him. Gandalf, breathless and irritable, wasted no time. We need to move. Thorin and the others are already miles ahead, and catching up won't be easy. The elves say they took the high pass, he added grimly. If the orcs have returned there after all these months, we might be walking straight into a trap. Eric frowned. That pass again, huh? Let's hope it's still clear. He turned to fetch his horse, but Gandalf stopped him with a raised hand. No need for that now. Better leave your mount in the elves' care. The path ahead isn't fit for hooves, too steep, too narrow, and there may be tunnels. Eric sighed. So, it's back to crawling through holes in the ground. Wonderful. Think of it as cardio, Gandalf said with a wink. They set off at once, tracing the dwarves' trail through the misty peaks. Meanwhile, far ahead, Thorin's company had just escaped a rather violent game between mountain-sized stone giants, who had taken a playful interest in hurling boulders at each other, and nearly at the dwarves as well. Now, drenched by an endless storm and exhausted to their bones, the company needed shelter. I see a cave, cried Philly from up front. Look safe. Thorin squinted. We'll rest here. No fires, we move at dawn. But Thorin, Balin interrupted cautiously, we should wait for Gandalf and Eric. Plans change, Thorin said curtly. That night, the dwarves were snoring like thunderclouds, sprawled out across the cold cave floor. Even Boffer, who'd volunteered for the watch, was nodding off, chin bobbing toward his chest. Bilbo blinked awake in the shadows. He sat up, quietly gathering his pack and walking stick. He tiptoed toward the cave mouth. Where are you going? Boffer suddenly asked, wide-eyed and fully alert. Home, Bilbo muttered. You can't. You're one of us now. No, I'm not. Thorin was right. I shouldn't have come. I left on a whim, and it was a mistake. Boffer's voice dropped. You're just homesick, that's all. You don't understand, Bilbo snapped, voice cracking. You're dwarves, you live on the road, you don't put down roots, you don't have homes. Boffer's expression fell. I'm sorry, Bilbo stammered, realizing too late how deeply he'd cut. But Boffer didn't lash out. No, you're right, he said softly. That's exactly why we're on this journey, to find our home again. He put a heavy hand on Bilbo's shoulder. May all the world's luck go with you, Bilbo Baggins. Wait, what's that? Boffer's eyes widened as Bilbo's short sword began to glow faint blue in the dark. It was Sting, and its light meant one thing. Orcs, Boffer whispered. More accurately, goblins. The dwarves' ability to find the worst possible rest stops was uncanny. The cave, seemingly safe, was actually the front entrance to Goblin Town, a sprawling, foul maze beneath the mountains, home to the twisted cousins of orcs. Wake up, everyone, get up, Thorin shouted, leaping to his feet. But it was already too late. Clang! The stone beneath them gave way with a loud crash, revealing a chute. The entire company tumbled down into darkness, bumping and thudding as they slid. Splash! They landed in a heap right in the middle of a goblin swarm. Hundreds of small, deformed creatures with yellow teeth and warty skin rushed at them from every direction. The dwarves fought back fiercely, but they were outnumbered. In moments, they were overwhelmed and dragged off deeper into Goblin Town. Only Bilbo remained, unnoticed, curled into a tight ball. Small, quiet, and oddly camouflaged by his travel-worn cloak, Bilbo's hobbit nature kept him hidden. Even the goblins' sharp noses missed him. But just as he peeked up and thought the danger had passed, a lone goblin, probably late to the party, spotted him. It shrieked and lunged. In the struggle, Bilbo lost his footing and tumbled off a ledge, straight into the shadows of a deep pit. And disappeared. Elsewhere. Back at the cliff edge, Eric stared up in awe. Mountain-sized stone giants were tossing boulders like toddlers with oversized toys. Their enormous bodies shook the peaks, voices rumbling like avalanches. Rock giant HP, 8,000, 8,000. These things make dragons look like puppies, he muttered. From a raw power standpoint, yes, Gandalf agreed, climbing up beside him. But don't worry, they're not terribly bright, and they couldn't care less about the affairs of Middle-earth. Sauron never controlled them, even Morgoth couldn't. They're true neutrals, the wizard said with a shrug. Eric chuckled, wish we had a few on our side. No use trying, they'll ignore you no matter how politely you ask. Eric adjusted his pack. Then let's move before they accidentally step on us. Chapter 59, Blockade Again. They should be waiting for us, Gandalf said, standing at the mist-choked pass. It was part of the plan, he added. That's the problem with plans, Eric replied, eyeing the terrain warily. They don't account for rainstorms and goblin hospitality. The narrow pass through the misty mountains looked the same as last time, gloomy, treacherous, and entirely too quiet. Well, Eric continued, even if they didn't wait with this downpour, they'll need shelter. That buys us time. We can catch up. Ahem. Gandalf halted, his gaze falling on a cave just off the path. This used to be the front hall of Goblin Town. The goblins built it ages ago as a shortcut to ambush travelers. No one's used this trail in years because of it. I once tried to get a decently moral stone giant to collapse the entrance, Gandalf muttered, half to himself. Couldn't get the bugger to understand what I meant. Communication issues. Left it be. As the old wizard recounted the history, he knelt and ran his hand along the damp earth. There are fresh traces here. The mechanism's been triggered recently. His face darkened. That's bad. Thorin and the others, they might have been captured. Well, that's just fantastic, Eric sighed. So what now? We storm the place. He stepped forward, tapping the wall and rapping the stone with his knuckles. Save your strength, Gandalf advised. Goblin Town's front gates are designed to be opened from the inside. Very clever engineering. But a sly grin crept across Eric's face as he reached into his satchel. I brought a diamond pickaxe, fully enchanted. You just point the way. Gandalf inhaled sharply, stroking his beard. Ah, yes, I forgot what you're capable of. This way, he said, stepping aside. Thunk, 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 thunk. With practiced rhythm, Eric swung the glimmering pickaxe. Stone crumbled before him in perfect, rectangular cuts. A tunnel 2 meters high and clean as a dwarven hall extended rapidly into the earth. Eric led the dig, while Gandalf followed behind, torch in hand. Wait, Gandalf said suddenly. We're close. Let me scout ahead. Raising his staff, he struck the ground. A shimmering pulse of light radiated outward, bypassing dirt, rock, and rubble. It expanded through the cavern system until it illuminated the goblins within, who were, unsurprisingly, completely unaware. It was a rare moment, Gandalf casting a wide-range detection spell. Normally, wizardly power was tightly restrained in Middle-earth, especially in front of mortals. But in Eric's presence, those restrictions seemed looser. Not removed, mind you. If Gandalf were fully unleashed, he could probably level a mountain. After all, in the ancient War of Wrath, entire continents sank beneath the sea. There, Gandalf said, pointing. 50 meters that way, then dig down. Thunk, thunk, thunk. The enchanted pickaxe made short work of the stone. Before long, a flicker of light seeped through a crack. Eric leaned forward and peered into the opening. He'd breached the central chamber of Goblin Town. A corpulent goblin chieftain sat smugly atop a rock platform, questioning 13 dwarves who were ringed by sneering goblins. Their confiscated weapons lay in a pile on the ground. Not content with just weapons, the goblins were now rifling through their belongings, unearthing several elegant silver utensils and candle holders, each inscribed with ancient script. Second Age work from Rivendell? The Goblin King scoffed, tossing the antiques aside like junk. Elven trash, worthless. Apparently, one of the dwarves had been souvenir shopping in Rivendell. Goblin looting instincts were simply superior. Well, 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 the Goblin King sneered, his fat face splitting into a grin. Look what the wargs dragged in. Thorin Oakenshield himself. Your head's got quite a price tag, he said, licking his lips. Dead or alive? Send word to Azog, the Dwarf King's mine. One goblin scurried away with the message. Just as the king turned back, another goblin picked up a sword from the pile. The moment the blade slid free from its sheath, he let out a horrified shriek and flung it away like it was cursed. The Goblin King glanced at the sword and immediately went pale. He stumbled backward, accidentally trampling a scrawny underling. Biter, he cried. That's Biter, the sword that slit 1,000 goblin throats. Whoosh! The crowd of goblins scattered, leaving a wide ring of empty space around the blade. None dared touch it. Even though its former owner had long since perished, the sword's reputation remained intact. "You filthy lot," the Goblin King roared, half in fear and half in fury. "Torture them, flay them, I want their skins peeled and their heads mounted." Crack! A whip lashed down on one of the dwarves. Another goblin tackled a dwarf, fists flying. One raised a jagged bone blade, ready to finish the job. "We move now," Gandalf declared. Without hesitation, the old wizard leapt down into the chamber. The drop was dizzying. Even Eric, with fall damage resistance, would have hesitated. "Madman," Eric muttered, biting into a golden apple before following. Boom! Just before Eric could jump, a blinding white explosion erupted from below. A powerful shockwave blasted outward from Gandalf's landing, scattering goblins like autumn leaves. The king's ornate stone and iron throne was shattered, sending his massive body tumbling with a yelp of pain. When the light faded, no one stood but Gandalf. All nearby goblins were unconscious, flattened, or simply missing. Even the king was groaning from the floor. "Gandalf," Thorin opened his eyes. The wizard drew his sword. The firing on his hand glowed faintly. "Arm yourselves, we fight." The dwarves surged to reclaim their weapons, hearts rekindled. "That sword, that's Glamdring," the Goblin King cried. "The foe hammer." Say what you will about goblin royalty, but he certainly knew his lore. Gandalf might not have recognized every ancient weapon, but this Goblin King, practically a walking museum docent. Then again, goblins could live quite a while. Azog himself had been around for over 2 centuries. "Get them," the king bellowed, raising a skull-tipped staff. "Kill the wizard and the dwarves." The initial shock wore off quickly. Waves of goblins surged forward, surrounding the company on all sides. 14 of us," Thorin muttered grimly, "thousands of them." Just then, slam! A black-clad figure dropped from the opening above, sword blazing. With a single sweep, he carved a clear zone around him, goblins flying like bowling pins. "It's him," the Goblin King howled, stumbling backward. "That savage human-orc bane." Eric stepped forward, eyes glinting. He swung again. The blade skimmed a goblin's throat, and the creature simply froze, eyes darting in terror, body no longer listening to commands. Eric gave it a gentle pat on the head. Thunk! A head rolled. This blade was far sharper than any normal weapon. Its minimum damage was 12, but realistically, most foes didn't even get a second chance. At the tunnel mouth, Eric stood like a dark knight, each sword arc sweeping goblins off their feet like a reaper in the wheat field. Every fallen goblin collided into the next, causing a domino effect. This, Eric thought, is the true power of Sweeping Edge. He made a mental note to consider adding knockback later. Maybe in this world, it wouldn't be as useless as in the game. Behind him, the dwarves glanced back in awe. The space between them and Erica was completely clear. No goblin dared approach. "Don't gawk, move," Gandalf barked, though even he stole a glance back. The Goblin King, now heavily guarded by a wall of his kind, kept his gaze locked on Eric's sword. He didn't recognize it, he had never seen it before. But now he'd learn it. Eric lightly ran a hand along the glowing blade, watching the hesitant horde. He raised his voice once more, calm and clear. "Come on then, try and get past me." Fun trivia: in The Hobbit, both Gandalf and Gollum refer to the cave-dwelling creatures as goblins, while the surface-dwelling, war-loving brutes are often called orcs. Technically, both terms refer to the same species, but this chapter makes a clear distinction. Goblins are the smaller, sneakier cave dwellers. Orcs are the hardened warriors of the open wilds. Chapter 60, The Ring. Black armor, an aura that could sweep aside an army, and a gaze, lofty and sharp, that didn't belong to any ordinary man. All of it, every terrifying inch, reminded the Goblin King of one figure, a presence that once ruled over all orcs and wargs with absolute power. The shadow in his memory began to overlap with the figure standing before him. No, it can't be him. Sure, this one was powerful, very powerful, but not that powerful. The one he was thinking of wasn't just a good fighter, he was a nightmare given flesh. Don't waste time clashing with him, take the other tunnel now. The Goblin King, seasoned in survival, turned tail and fled with a stampede of howling goblins in tow. "Hey, what? You're really running away." "Get back here," Eric shouted, sprinting after them. Back inside the cave network, chaos had broken out. Eric was chasing a mob of goblins, slashing as he ran. Meanwhile, a different swarm of goblins had surrounded Gandalf and the dwarves. The poor Goblin King was stuck in the middle, sweating bullets, dodging attacks from Eric while barking out commands to his goblins to harass the others. The whole place was filled with shouts, clangs, and squeals, pure pandemonium. While battles raged above, at the bottom of a forgotten crevice deep within the mountain, Bilbo Baggins slowly awoke. His eyes fluttered open to the sound of a rasping voice muttering nearby. "Goblin meat, stringy and tough, gotta peel the skin off first, yes, precious. Still better than nothing, Gollum." Thanks to the unique stealthiness of hobbits, Bilbo had avoided being spotted even while unconscious. Now, crouched behind a rock, he peered out at the source of the voice. A small, wiry creature bludgeoning a goblin to death with a rock. The poor goblin didn't stand a chance. As it collapsed in a heap, something golden slipped from the creature's tattered loincloth. A ring. It bounced once, then rolled directly to Bilbo's feet. He picked it up, blinking. "What's this?" The gold gleamed warmly in his palm. Quite pretty, actually. "Gollum." Startled, Bilbo quickly tucked the ring into his pocket and glanced back toward the goblin slayer. The creature was licking its lips. It was unsettling. Bilbo's pulse quickened. He looked away to steady his nerves, but when he turned back, the creature was gone. He froze. A moment later, two bulging eyes appeared right in front of him. "Oh, precious, look at that juicy face, so plump, so full of meat. Gollum." The creature grinned wickedly and lunged. Bilbo yelped and instinctively drew his short sword, placing the tip right against the creature's throat. "Back, stay back." "Gollum, that blade an elvish blade. But you're not an elf, not an orc either. What are you, him?" "I'm Bilbo Baggins." Baggins is what, Gollum?" "I'm a hobbit from the Shire." "Ooh, hobbits, we've had bats, we've had fish. But never hobbits, no, never tasted that. Gollum, are they sweet, tender?" "Back off." Bilbo waved his blade again, forcing the creature to retreat. "Listen, I don't want trouble. Just tell me the way out and we can both walk away from this. I'm not playing games here." "Games?" "We love games, precious. Yes, Riddleses. If you wins, we show the way out, Gollum." "Oh, we?" "Yes, me and Precious, of course, Gollum." Bilbo looked around, no one else. Right, schizophrenic cannibal, great. The creature was, of course, Gollum, who had survived alone in this shadowy pit beneath the goblin town for who knew how long. And somehow, by fate or sheer absurdity, the hobbit and the monster began a game of riddles. Bad luck for Gollum, because Bilbo Baggins was very good at riddles. Within minutes, Gollum was losing, badly. And he hated losing. "You lost," Bilbo said, slightly breathless but relieved. "Now show me the way out." "Lost? No, precious. We didn't lose, Gollum." Gollum glared at Bilbo's sword, then slowly reached toward his waist, where he normally kept his precious ring. His fingers fumbled, found nothing. "It's gone." His eyes went wild. "My precious, my precious, NOOO lost, stolen." "What's in your pockets, Gollum growled, eyes narrowing at Bilbo. "Nothing." Bilbo shifted, keeping the ring hidden behind his back. You took it, my precious." With a scream, Gollum lunged. Bilbo didn't have time to react, he was slammed to the ground. The ring flew from his hand, spinning through the air. And then, it slipped onto Bilbo's finger. Perfect fit. And in that instant, Bilbo vanished. Just like that, he was gone from Gollum's sight. The ring had chosen, it was done with Gollum. Where is he? Where did he go? Gollum thrashed, screamed, sobbed. He must be heading for the exit. Yes, the exit. Muttering madly, Gollum began stumbling away. Bilbo, still invisible, didn't waste time pondering the magic. He tiptoed after him, grateful for the stroke of luck. Back in the upper caverns, Gandalf was leading the charge, blasting goblins with his staff and slashing with his sword. "Move, move," he barked. But when he glanced back, the goblins hadn't stopped. In fact, they were chasing harder, like something had scared them forward. "What now? Why won't they quit?" "They're like bugs in armor," one dwarf shouted. At the rear, the Goblin King was panting as he scrambled along, giving orders and anxiously glancing behind him. There, still behind him, was him. That man in black. That demon of a warrior. And he was still chasing, still running, still placing block after block underfoot to scale impossible terrain like a madman. Why won't he stop chasing me? Terrified, the Goblin King pushed forward, driving the goblins and dwarves toward a narrow choke point. Finally, he thought they were cornered. The black figure was no longer in sight. Maybe they'd lost him. "You're out of road, wizard," the Goblin King growled, swinging his massive skull-headed staff at Gandalf. Gandalf blocked with his sword, but a sword is still a sword, and this thing was basically a bony warhammer. Clang! The force of the blow knocked Gandalf back several feet. He stumbled, barely keeping his footing. The Goblin King grinned. "Let's see you cast your way out of this one." He raised the staff again. But Gandalf slammed his own staff into the ground. And his sword, dropped earlier, suddenly flew through the air, spinning straight toward the Goblin King. Shunk. It sliced across his belly. The Goblin King collapsed to his knees, wheezing. Victory was at hand. "W8, stop, I surrender, let's be civil, I'll let you go." Before Gandalf could speak, a voice rang out from above. A voice that made every goblin shudder. It was him. He had caught up. Up on the ledge, Eric removed the block he'd been placing to bridge the gap, drew his sword, and leapt. Down he came in a perfect arc. Crack! The sword slammed into the Goblin King's head, ending him in one clean blow. Chapter 61, Bewitchment. Reputation with Misty Mountain orcs, -1,000. Current standing, -3,456, Nemesis. Thud. The Goblin King collapsed with a heavy crash, dead before the flames of battle could even catch in his eyes. His health bar had vanished in an instant. The moment he died, the word Nemesis on Eric's system interface turned blood red, as if it had been forcibly activated. "He's dead, the king is dead." A lone goblin screeched, and panic rippled like wildfire. Cries of grief rose, confused shrieks followed, and some, in desperation, surged forward, weapons in hand, perhaps hoping a little violence might smother their fear. But it was pointless. Now, while they're in Chaos Run, Gandalf's voice cut through the uproar like lightning as he led the way down a winding path. Eric raised his sword and forced back a few frenzied goblins, retreating step by step. Yet the goblins recovered from their confusion faster than expected. The weight of reality settled on them. Their king truly was gone. A chilling silence replaced their panic, and hundreds of sharp, green eyes turned toward Eric and his companions. They came all at once. Eric looked up. The stone walls, wooden bridges, even the cavern's ceiling itself, were crawling with goblins. They spilled from cracks and shadows like a swarm, filling every crevice with their rage. "If we get swarmed here, we're finished," Eric said grimly. "This place is too open, I can't hold them off." He quickly pulled out a pickaxe and began digging into the cavern wall chunk. Chunk stone flew as he carved out a tunnel and placed blocks behind him to seal off the path. "In here, quick, we'll mine our way out." "Wait, don't jump in." Gandalf yanked a dwarf back just in time and turned to Eric. "There are 13 dwarves, lad. Time's not on our side." "I saw light up ahead. That has to be the back exit. Follow me," Gandalf barked. "And move fast. Goblins won't dare enter the sunlight." "Run!" he bellowed again and dashed forward, surprisingly nimble for someone his age. Eric reluctantly stowed the pickaxe and followed, eyes darting about for danger and for one missing hobbit. He hadn't seen Bilbo at all during the chaos. Where was he? Boom! A crack of thunder echoed through the caverns. Gandalf, pressed by the goblin blockade, unleashed another blast of lightning. It wasn't as dramatic as before, but it got the job done, just enough to clear a path. As they pushed forward, the cave grew brighter. The sound of wind drifted in, and sunlight shimmered faintly ahead. The exit. One by one, the dwarves scrambled into the open. Gandalf followed, his robe flapping wildly behind him. Eric hesitated at the threshold. He scanned the dark recesses of the cave again, nothing. Still no sign of Bilbo. Then he turned and sprinted into the daylight. FWOSH. Sunlight stabbed at their eyes like golden needles. Blinded, gasping for air, none of them stopped. They kept running until the forest welcomed them with its shade and silence. 1, 2, 13, Gandalf panted, counting each dwarf. Wait, where's Bilbo? He froze, eyes scanning the tree line. Earlier. Bilbo had followed Gollum all the way to the back exit. He could see the light now, not far away. But the creature had stopped at the mouth of the tunnel, blocking the way out. And though Gollum didn't have the strength to hold it, he wasn't leaving it unguarded either. But the moment Gandalf's group approached, Gollum yelped and vanished behind a rock, trembling and hiding his oversized eyes. Bilbo saw them pass. He opened his mouth to call for help, but they were already gone. Gollum, watching them leave, exhaled a sigh of relief and slithered out again, grumbling and searching for his precious thief. Bilbo backed deeper into the tunnel. Then tap, tap, tap. Someone was coming back. A tall figure appeared at the cave mouth, casting a long shadow. Gollum squeaked and curled into a ball behind a stone. Bilbo's heart leapt. For a moment, he thought their eyes had met. He almost shouted, "Wah!" But the figure turned and left. Another chance missed. Bilbo sighed and drew his short sword. He turned his gaze to Gollum, still sniffing and murmuring in the dark. He could end it now. Just one stroke, one clean stroke, the creature who tried to kill him would be dead. But then Gandalf's voice echoed in his mind. True courage is not about knowing when to kill, but knowing when to spare. He stared into Gollum's wide, pitiful eyes. Then shook his head. He shoved Gollum over with a well-aimed kick and bolted into the sunlight. "You thieving little sneak," Gollum screeched after him. Bilbo didn't look back. He raced through the forest, following the trail of his companions. "No need to search," Thorin said grimly to Gandalf. "He's probably abandoned us, gone home." "No," said a familiar voice behind them. Bilbo stepped from the trees. "Bilbo," Gandalf's face lit up with a rare smile. "I can't remember the last time I was so glad to see someone." "How did you escape?" a dwarf asked. Bilbo hesitated. His hand slipped into his pocket, fingers curling around something cold and smooth. The ring. Should he tell them? But why did the thought of parting with it make him feel so uneasy? It wasn't even his, just a trinket with a bit of magic. He drew a breath. "Does it matter?" Gandalf interrupted, clapping him on the back. "He's here." "Of course it matters." Thorin stepped forward, eyeing the hobbit. "I want to know, why did you come back?" Bilbo met his gaze. "I know you've doubted me, and you're right. I did want to go home. I miss my garden, my armchair, my kettle by the fire. That's my home. And you don't have that. You don't have a home." He looked around at them all. "So I'll help you take yours back." The dwarves fell silent. Gandalf's expression softened. Eric clapped Bilbo on the shoulder. Then he frowned. There was something in Bilbo's pocket. It glinted faintly, just enough to catch Eric's eye through the fabric. The one ring. For a heartbeat, Eric felt something stir inside him, a burning urge to take it. Status bewitched 3 seconds. As soon as Eric noticed the status effect, it vanished. New stat, corruption 0%. A new bar appeared on his interface. "Eric, what are you doing?" Everyone stared at him. He was holding a massive iron bucket and downing milk straight from it like a man possessed. Where did he even get that? "Just thirsty," he said, wiping his mouth and burping. Even as he drowned himself in dairy, the corruption bar remained stubbornly fixed in place, like a shadow that had settled in. That ring was trouble. He looked away from it. The faint glow vanished. Elsewhere, not far from the back gate of the orc fortress. High on a ridge, Azog the Defiler bared his teeth at the goblin messenger, listening to the report of the carnage below. The dwarves had escaped, and the goblin king slain. After them, he roared. "Awo!" Wolf howls echoed across the hills. Gandalf looked up sharply. A white figure loomed in the distance, riding at the head of a pack of wargs and orcs. Hundreds of them. "Run!" Gandalf shouted. They'd barely caught their breath before they were sprinting again, crashing through the trees to escape the howls behind them. "Is it too much to ask for one peaceful moment?" Eric muttered, turning on his heel as the dwarves rushed past. He drew his sword. The blade gleamed under the sunset sky. The wargs came, howling like a tide of fangs and fur, rushing down the slope in waves. But one wave broke. Right where Eric stood. They struck something immovable. His golden apple's shield had worn off, but his enchanted armor remained. A few wargs tried biting and immediately regretted it. Eric could take dozens of hits, but every time he struck back, it left behind a smoldering corpse. Azog noticed the disturbance. "Keep chasing the dwarves," he growled to his horde. "I'll deal with him." And the white orc turned toward Eric, blade in hand. Chapter 62, Azog. Nemesis. The word meant only one would walk away alive. Eric never thought of orcs as particularly strong enemies, but the feeling clearly wasn't mutual. "You," growled Azog, lumbering forward with a massive warhammer slung over one shoulder. "And those blasted dwarves, you killed the chieftain of Goblin Town." Behind him, the gathered orcs roared and banged weapons together, a savage cheer echoing through the valley like a warped celebration. "Orc Slayer, enemy of orcs. What revolting titles. You really think all of us fear you? That'll be your final mistake." Thud. With a casual swing of his warhammer, Azog smashed a nearby sapling in half, the splintered trunk toppling with a dramatic crash. It might have been more impressive if it hadn't been such a skinny tree. "First, I'll kill you," he snarled, "then drag your corpse back to the dwarves and crush them with your bones." HP 3030. Eric didn't bother replying to the trash talk. Instead, his eyes flicked up, scanning the approaching orc. Azog wasn't bluffing. The brute was massive, easily over 7 feet tall, bulging with corded muscle. Honestly, for an orc, he looked premium. Saruman's later Uruk-hai might someday surpass him, but for now, Azog was top dog. Eric rolled his shoulders. "Talk is cheap. Don't throw your back out trying to impress the boys." With a smirk, Eric drew his sword. "Right back at you," Azog bellowed, raising his hammer. Clang! Steel met steel, or in this case, enchanted sword met blunt, brutal iron. The force of the impact was tremendous. Eric's arms rang with pain as the strike knocked his blade wide, leaving his chest exposed. First strike, advantage Azog. That was the first time Eric really felt what it was like to have a weapon smashed aside by sheer brute force. Azog grinned a smile full of cruelty and followed up with another hammer swing, this one aimed straight for the chest. Thud! The blow landed. Even through his enchanted netherite-forged armor, Eric felt the impact reverberate through his ribs. He staggered half a step back. -1 HP. He actually chipped my health bar. That was rare. Even with his protection IV netherite armor, Azog's ordinary strike had still chipped away some health. Still, his full protection armor soaked most of the blow. A flash of red shimmered across his HUD, and then HP 3030. Instant regen kicked in. Eric lunged, sword flashing in a deadly arc. He moved faster than Azog expected. 1,000 battles against orcs and wargs had honed his reflexes. His swordplay might not win any tournaments, but when it came to drawing, slashing, and resetting for another strike, Eric was a master of efficiency. This sword had eaten its way through hordes, but this time... Clang! Azog's metal-plated left arm shot up, catching the blade between its sharp prongs. He snarled and swung again. Thump! Eric whipped out his shield in time to block, but the impact sent a shimmer through the magic runes. Shield, cooling down. RAH. Feeling dominant, Azog raised his arms like a prizefighter and strutted around the makeshift arena, muscles gleaming in the fading sunlight. His orcs and wargs whooped and hollered. Some even mimicked him, raising weapons and snarling mockingly. They thought he'd won. Eric scanned the crowd with a slow, unimpressed gaze. Any orc who accidentally made eye contact quickly looked away, hunched over like they'd been caught misbehaving. Honestly, if Azog hadn't been here, the entire mob would have scattered the moment they saw him. Such was the morale boost a big boss could bring. As the battle continued, the sun dipped low behind the mountains, and the pale moon rose high. Starlight glimmered over the gathering, and in that moment, a change swept over the orcs. Their posture straightened, muscles tensed, weakness fell away. Night had come and night belonged to the orcs. Several of them, emboldened by the moon and their boss's presence, dared to meet Eric's gaze directly now. "You're doomed," one called. "Wheel." Clang. Azog was back on him, another shield block, another cooldown. This time, Eric could feel the increased pressure. Azog was ramping up, but no matter how hard he hit, the shield would always block once before it needed to cool down. "That's getting annoying," Eric muttered. Bosses in games were easy. Just stack their health and damage until they became a walking spreadsheet. But Azog was real. He wasn't just stat padding, he knew how to fight. Time to get serious. Eric stopped playing around. Sword flicked, flashed, and blurred through the night air. His strikes came faster, more precise. Azog faltered, backpedaled, but parried, blocked, grunted. His raw strength was still a threat. But stamina, that was finite. Eric's wasn't. As long as he had food, he was an infinite engine of pain. Slash. Swoosh. Finally, Azog slipped. Boom. A single clean strike connected. Fire bloomed across Azog's chest, the enchanted blade splitting his torso open like a cracked furnace. He roared in agony, staggering, blood pouring like lava. His health plummeted. In desperation, Azog hurled his hammer. Eric ducked, but by the time he looked up, the horde was already on him, throwing themselves at Eric like a flood of angry zombies, trying to protect their boss. Eric felt like he was chopping through a wall of meat. No matter how many he cut down, more took their place. By the time the bodies finally stopped falling, Azog was gone. Far off in the distance, Eric spotted him being lifted onto a massive white warg easily twice the size of the others. The warg matriarch. Eric fired several arrows in rapid succession, but the beast dodged every shot, weaving like a trained rogue. "Seriously, I need an auto-aim enchantment." The warg growled viciously at him before sprinting away. On its back, clutching his chest, Azog glared back at Eric with burning hatred, as if trying to etch his face into his memory. The remaining orcs broke and ran after their wounded leader. Minus 300 orc reputation. Current reputation. Eric had a feeling, if that number dropped much lower, something was going to happen. He took a step forward, trying to pursue, but then... Howl. Dozens of wargs came sprinting back, surrounding him in a tight circle. They didn't attack, just kept him penned in. Orders from their king, most likely. Eric took a step forward. They stepped back. He drew his sword and feinted a charge. The nearest warg yelped like a puppy with its tail, stepped on and crashed backward into its comrades. "You've got guts staying here. Shame you're all red-named and untamable." He sighed, a whole pack of rideable mounts, if only they weren't trying to eat him. But time was ticking. He unsheathed his glowing blade once more. It gleamed with runic light, and the wargs had seen enough. They scattered like skeletons at sunrise. New title unlocked, Bane of Wargs. Eric dashed off in the direction Azog had fled, but after the delay, there was no sign of him, just trampled dirt and blood trails. "You can run, Azog, but I'll be the last thing you ever see." He sheathed his sword. "That head of yours, I'll just let it stay on your shoulders for now." The battlefield was eerily quiet now. Orcs and wargs were gone. Eric turned and began making his way toward where the dwarves had gone. He found only destruction. Flames roared across the clearing. The cliff edge was blackened. Of the dwarves, Bilbo, or even Gandalf, there was no sign. What? He stepped over a flaming log, peering around. "You left me behind, really." Whoosh! A powerful gust of wind nearly knocked him back. ERIC. A massive eagle soared up from the cliff's edge. Gandalf perched on its back like some kind of pipe-smoking, wizardly cowboy. "Took you long enough, hop on." Moments later, Eric sat cross-legged on the eagle's back, wind in his hair, talking with Gandalf. "Honestly, I thought you'd all gotten eat, or just left me to die." "Don't be ridiculous," Gandalf said, lighting his pipe. "This party might lose me, but they'd never leave you behind." He blew a cloud of smoke and added, "We got surrounded by wargs near the cliff. The dwarves held their ground, but they were exhausted, nearly forced over the edge. I used a little magic to separate us from the beasts. Gandalf nodded to the eagle. Then I called in a few friends. These great eagles weren't ordinary beasts. They were intelligent, noble creatures with a status far beyond that of common animals, and they were allies of Gandalf. Gandalf exhaled, looking tired. That so-called little spell was probably a full-blown firestorm or something. Gandalf let out a long sigh. Today has been exceptionally tiring. Chapter 63, Stay on the Road. Near the vales in Anduin, atop the cliffs of Carrick. This was as far as the great eagles were willing to carry them. With a gust of wind and a final graceful dip, they gently dropped the group off and soared away into the distant skies, returning toward their mountain nests. Eric had no idea what had happened during his absence, but judging by everyone's exhausted yet intact state, it hadn't gone too badly. "Bilbo," Thorin said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I once said there was no place for you among us. That was the greatest mistake of my life." He gave the hobbit a tight, heartfelt embrace. Eric, mildly surprised, leaned over to Gandalf. "What happened while I was gone?" Gandalf kept his voice low. Thorin was nearly torn apart by wargs. He was completely spent, cornered. Bilbo rushed in and saved him. "I see," Eric murmured. "Luck might be random, but courage is always a choice." Eric glanced at Bilbo, then at the bulging pocket in his waistcoat. That thing. Perhaps it was fate that the ring ended up in Bilbo's hands, part of the great song of the world. But still, no one is born to suffer, and no one deserves torment just for playing their part. That said, Eric had to admit, Bilbo's resistance to dark magic was something else. Holding onto that cursed ring for 60 years and then choosing to let it go? That was downright heroic. If there was a way, perhaps the burden of the ring didn't have to rot him from the inside out. Maybe it could be stopped at the root. One more thing to add to the ever-growing to-do list after this little trip to the Lonely Mountain. After a short rest, the company descended from Carrick and resumed their march toward Erebor. Several days later, across the valley, Gandalf stood on a high ridge, his brows furrowed as he surveyed the land below. The forest's edge, the plains, and even the riverbanks, everywhere was crawling with wargs and orcs. "They've sent out their entire war host," a dwarf muttered below. "Even the scouts searching for us must number in the thousands." "It's a full-scale mobilization," cried another. Gandalf rubbed his temples. His poor eyebrows hadn't had a break in days. Just then, "Arrow-o-zirar." A deep, thunderous roar echoed from the cliffs above. Everyone immediately reached for their weapons. A massive bear stood there, glaring down at them, baring teeth the size of daggers. "Heavens," one dwarf gasped, trembling. "That's the biggest bear I've ever seen." The bear leapt. Eric instinctively reached for his sword. "Wait," Gandalf threw out an arm, stepping between Eric and the bear. "Beorn, I know it's you. Easy now. I'm Gandalf the Grey, companion of Radagast the Brown. He and I are quite close." The bear locked eyes with Gandalf. For a moment, the wizard's scalp crawled like it was about to peel off. Then the beast stepped back. Its enormous frame began to shrink, fur pulling inward, paws transforming into hands, and within seconds, a man taller than any man they'd ever seen stood before them. The dwarves blinked, rubbed their eyes, whispered to each other in disbelief. "He's a skin changer," Gandalf explained. "A rare breed. His kind can take on the form of beasts." Beorn looked down at the group, towering over them. His gaze passed over Eric and Bilbo with mild interest, but paused, frowning at the dwarves. Wizards, men, halflings, and greedy dwarves. His voice was rough and not exactly welcoming. "What business do you have near my land?" "We mean no harm," Gandalf said quickly. "We're only passing through." Beorn's story was a tragic one. His people, skin changers like him, had been driven from their mountain homes by the orcs. Most were dead now, taken, tortured, or hunted to extinction. Beorn might be the last of his kind. And the last thing Gandalf wanted was for him to get into a fight with Eric, especially if it led to the end of the skin changer race entirely. After a long silence, Beorn nodded slowly. "I believe you." Gandalf exhaled in relief. Thankaroo, we're not wrestling a bear today. And what about you? He asked. Why are you here of all places? Hiding, Beorn grunted. The orcs have been everywhere these past few days, mad rabid. Even I wouldn't charge through them alone. He shook his head grimly. Last time I saw so many orcs was when they tried to expand north of the valley. But there's nothing left up there now, no villages, no treasure, just dead trees. I don't understand what they're after this time. Gandalf glanced at Eric, awkwardly. Eric shrugged. Anyway, Eric said, we do have a common enemy. We'd appreciate your help. Together, we stand a better chance. Beorn fell silent again, his eyes narrowing as he studied each of them. His gaze lingered on Eric for a long while. Finally, he nodded. The enemy of orcs is a friend of mine. I'll help. I know a path, one they don't patrol. Travel by day, and you'll avoid most of their warbins. I'll keep watch, he added gruffly. That night, beneath the moonlight, a great bear stood atop the cliff, eyes sweeping the horizon. Inside Beorn's homestead, the company was warm, well-fed, and blissfully asleep. Far away, an orc scout whispered into his captain's ear. Chief, we spotted a giant bear near the ridge. Orders. The captain snorted. It's big, sure, but not that big. Send a few more lads and we can bring it down. No, the scout leader cut him off. Don't provoke it, go around. We've no time to pick stupid fights. He squinted at a map, his finger tracing a route. Our priority is that group of dwarves, and that cursed. His breath hitched, just thinking about him made his skin crawl. If you spot him, don't engage. Report back immediately. We'll bring the entire horde. Understood. Dawn came swiftly. Beorn offered up freshly baked honey cakes and sweet mead. He provided sturdy ponies, pointed out a hidden path, and saw them off safely. Meanwhile, with the orcs unable to locate their quarry, their forces eventually scattered, confused and aimless. After a few fruitless days, they began to withdraw from the plain entirely. At last, the company arrived at the edge of Mirkwood. The trees stood tall and twisted, a dark, brooding canopy stretching endlessly beyond the path. This was the gateway to the woodland realm and a place where the light rarely touched the forest floor. Here, the ponies were released save for one, which Gandalf held by the reins. This forest is steeped in shadow now, he murmured. Something foul stirs within. He turned to Eric. Eric, may I ask a favor? Eric raised an eyebrow. Depends, what kind of favor? Gandalf stepped closer, speaking low so the others wouldn't hear. I need to confirm something. Tell me, do you know of the Nazgul? A bit, Eric said. Servants of Sauron. Gandalf winced. Bilbo glanced up startled. Oi, Eric, don't say his name out loud. Gandalf rubbed his temples, again. Even without the ring, he isn't dead. Not fully. Speaking his name can draw attention. Don't worry, Eric said. He can't exactly crawl out of the shadows and punch me in the nose. Still, Gandalf muttered, better safe than cursed. Elves call him, he who must not be named, for a reason. Gandalf composed himself. Anyway, I suspect the Nazgul are stirring again. I need to be sure. I'll be taking a long journey. You want me to come with you? No, I'll go alone. But when I return, I'd like you to join me for a visit to Dol Guldur. Something's lurking there. Something, Eric thought. Try the Dark Lord himself. Sure, Eric said aloud. When do you expect to be back? Gandalf gave a rather non-precise estimate that could mean a while. Right, Eric nodded. See you then. If anyone arrives first, wait at the gate for 3 days, Gandalf added. With that, the wizard mounted his pony and departed once more. Eric turned back to the group. Mirkwood loomed ahead. What did Gandalf say? Bilbo asked, curiosity shining in his eyes. The dwarves leaned in too. Eric hesitated. There were things they couldn't quite grasp, even if he explained. He said Mirkwood is crawling with dark magic. It's safer if we stick to the main road. Bilbo nodded gravely. Got it, stay on the road. I'll be careful. Chapter 64, The Dark Forest. At the very moment the expedition stepped into the forest's brooding edge, high atop a dark tower within Dol Guldur, a shadowy figure loomed over the lands steeped in gloom. Azog. The voice was neither heard nor spoken. It struck directly into the pale orc's mind like a blade of cold iron. Azog jerked awake, gasping, clutching his chest. The massive wound, once torn from shoulder to waist, was now sealed-healed, but marked with a long scar as proof it had been real. Lifting his head, Azog glared toward the tower, toward the dark silhouette that had called his name. For a moment, fury flashed in his eyes, until he realized it wasn't the one he truly hated. No, this was the Dark Lord himself, Sauron. Azog, you will lead the army. The time for war draws near. Azog's lips curled in resentment. And the dwarf, you promised me his death. A lesser orc would have been flayed alive for such insolence. But Azog wasn't just any orc. He was Sauron's warhound, yes, but one on a leash of negotiation rather than fear. Sauron didn't reply to the question. Instead, he pressed the command harder, more absolute. Azog snarled, fists clenched, but obedience, however reluctant, was demanded. Finally, with a growl, he summoned his son. Bolg, he barked, take the warband, continue the hunt for the dwarves. Bolg stood tall, broad, cruel, and every bit as fierce as his father. If you come across the human, Azog muttered with a glint in his eye, you may fall back if you must, but if you can kill him, the leadership is yours. With that, Bolg marched out, followed by a squad of hulking orcs. Deep in the dark forest, the dwarves trudged onward, yawning and grumbling in equal measure. Though the forest canopy blotted out the sky, casting a murky twilight over all, the company's journey had thus far been oddly uneventful. They now stood before a crumbled stone bridge that once spanned a slow-moving, dark river. Don't touch it, Eric warned, catching a dwarf about to dip a finger into the water. Instead, Eric filled a bucket, inspected the water. It looked normal. Magic doesn't travel well. Must be bound to this cursed forest, he muttered, mostly to himself. Behind him, Thorin raised his voice, scolding the others. Didn't you lot hear what Gandalf said before we entered? This whole forest is drenched in dark magic. That river's full of curses. There are vines, someone suggested. We could swing across. Lightest ones go first. No need, Eric cut in smoothly. Let's build a bridge. Without waiting for argument, Eric pulled stone blocks from his pack, seemingly from thin air. With a few plop-plop-plops, stone blocks began appearing midair, clicking neatly into place across the broken bridge. He even widened the edges for the broader members of the company. Incredible, murmured Balin, blinking away his drowsiness. Magic stonework. Thank heavens, Boffer muttered. I wouldn't trust that vine with Bomber's weight. Oi, Bomber huffed. Killy stepped cautiously onto the bridge, testing it with a few solid stomps. Feels real, solid. How do you make rock appear like that? Philly snorted. You've seen what Gandalf does. Fire, lightning, thunderclaps. Next to that, conjuring stone is practically domestic magic. Then, glancing sheepishly at Eric, he added, no offense, of course. None taken, Eric replied with a grin, clapping him on the shoulder. By now, the dwarves treated Eric much as they did Gandalf, with wary respect and an unspoken assumption of authority. Eric didn't complain. He had signed a contract, after all, and unlike Gandalf, was officially part of the company. Even Thorin, who usually snapped at everyone for the slightest mistake, never once turned his infamous temper on Eric, just as he never dared bark at Gandalf. As Balin once said, he's a wizard, you don't question wizards. Only in Eric's case, the wizard actually had a clause in the agreement. From the rear, Bilbo watched Eric conjure stone paths with a flick of his wrist. His hand drifted unconsciously to his pocket, brushing the ring hidden inside. Does this count as magic too? He wondered. Keep moving, Thorin called. Let's cross before nightfall. Beyond the river, the path dipped into darker territory closer to the woodland elves' realm, yes, but also to things that stirred in the shadows. Eric's eyes narrowed at the sight of webbing glinting between the trees. He resisted the impulse to harvest some silk. Those webs were traps. Giant spiders used them to feel vibrations, sensing prey by the slightest tremor. Bad idea, he thought. I'd be fine, but the others, not so much. One wrong move and... SSSSKKKRRRCH. A low chittering came from above. In a blink, Eric's sword was in his hand, cleaving upward in a flash of steel and fire. A monstrous spider carcass crashed down, its legs twitching, its body smoldering. Achievement unlocked, Spider Slayer. Description: you killed a spider. Good job. Thorin leapt to attention. What in Durin's name was that? A spider, Eric replied coolly. A big one. They're everywhere in these woods. Evil things, servants of the dark. Did any of you touch the webs? The dwarves shook their heads, alarmed. Nope. Not me. I didn't even see a web. Bilbo gave a tiny shake of his head. He'd been right beside Eric the whole time. Then it came looking for us, Eric muttered, retrieving the spider's eye and some of its stringy silk. Useful crafting materials, he thought, too good to waste. Which means more aren't far behind, he added, casually eyeing the trees. Prepare for battle, Thorin roared suddenly, spotting movement in the canopy. Bilbo drew his small sword. They're not orcs, he muttered. There. He looked up and his jaw dropped. Dozens upon dozens of giant spiders were descending from the treetops. The sky itself seemed to vanish beneath the tide of twitching, black legs. Run, Thorin shouted, his voice echoing Gandalf's favorite advice. Aotichach. Bombur, as expected, became their first target. He flailed, smashing spiders with his frying pan like an enraged chef. Eric moved fast. Sword swinging in smooth arcs, each strike split a spider clean in half. He cut a blazing path through the forest, never slowing, never stumbling. His backpack grew heavy with trophies: eyeballs, silk, chitin. From above, the trail they carved looked like someone had drawn a fiery line through the woods, spiders burning in their wake. Most of the creatures were forced back, though a few daring ones leapt from the canopy in desperate lunges, only to be skewered by dwarven steel. Schlick. Even Bilbo, who appeared to be dueling enemies only he could see, somehow managed to stab a spider straight through the head. He paused, blinking. He could have sworn the spider said something when it died. A sting. He looked at his blade. That's a good name. From now on, your sting. Just as it seemed the worst was behind them, the sound of whistling arrows sliced through the air. One by one, the remaining spiders dropped, each pierced dead center through the eyes or underbelly. From the trees above came swift, silent figures in cloaks of green and silver. Elves gliding between branches, striking with unnatural grace. But they didn't lower their weapons once the spiders were gone. In fact, they raised them. Don't flatter yourselves, dwarf, said a young elf with piercing blue eyes and a rather cocky draw of his bowstring. I'd gladly shoot a dwarf or 12. The lead elf, tall and youthful, had his bow trained on Thorin's chest. Eric narrowed his eyes. Though they'd never met, he recognized him immediately. Legolas, Prince of the Woodland Realm, son of Thranduil. The woodland elves were not like the serene folk of Rivendell. They were less refined, more alert, and often less patient. Years of defending their borders and dealing with humans had made them sharp and, frankly, a bit irritable. Eric stepped forward, sword still sheathed. Hold, an elf warned, raising his bow. Legolas turned at the movement and froze. He looked directly at Eric, eyes narrowing, then relaxing. With a wave of his hand, he signaled his warriors to lower their bows. Do not aim at him, he said coolly. He is our honored guest. Chapter 65, The Woodland Realm. I've heard of you before, said Legolas as he lowered his bow and stepped forward. A warrior said to wield strange and powerful magic, the bane of orcs Eric Starfell. He offered a respectful nod. Welcome to the Woodland Realm. I am Legolas. I greet you in the name of our kingdom. Eric inclined his head slightly in return, offering a polite smile. Lately, the tales of this particular human had grown increasingly common and increasingly absurd. When Legolas first heard them, he thought them mere drunken exaggerations. After all, how could a man possibly do half of what the rumors claimed? Then his father, King Thranduil of the Woodland Realm, confirmed the truth of those tales. And that changed everything. Reputation with the Woodland Realm, plus 500 respect. Eric had never set foot in the Woodland Realm before, yet his reputation here had already reached respect. It wasn't hard to guess why. He'd thoroughly cleared out the orc camps that had been harassing the valleys near the dark forest's edge. The elves had watched him work. Since his arrival in the region, the orcs had all but vanished from the forest borders. Only the giant spiders remained a problem. By now, most factions in the region regarded Eric with a mix of awe and deep respect. Only the more distant strongholds hadn't caught up with his legend, but the rumors were spreading fast. Just then, a female elf approached. She looked Eric up and down, not with suspicion but with interest. "Toriel," she introduced herself crisply, "Captain of the Guard, I greet you." Eric nodded. "Pleasure to meet you both." Formalities exchanged, Legolas gestured behind him. "We would offer you better hospitality, but first I must deal with these dwarves." He motioned toward the grumbling, armored figures behind Eric. "They're my companions," Eric explained. "My apologies, but we have no way of knowing what purpose dwarves have for approaching our gates. They must be questioned." With a subtle wave of his hand, elven guards stepped forward to search the dwarves. "Oi, what's this supposed to be?" a dwarf barked. "You treat us like thieves. This is discrimination," another snapped. "We're with Eric," someone else protested. "Didn't you hear? Hands off my pack, you twig-eared." "Our objective is the same," Eric cut in calmly. The words hung in the air like an enchantment. Suddenly, everything froze. If the dwarves' goal was the same as Eric's, then any attempt to detain them could be interpreted as opposing him, which no one in their right mind wanted to do. Legolas hesitated, turning back toward Eric. He opened his mouth to speak, only to be interrupted by the arrival of a breathless scout. "The king requests your presence, Eric Starfell," the elf said, bowing slightly. Legolas sighed and backed off. "Take them all inside." The dwarves exhaled in relief. Bilbo Baggins, who had been invisibly shadowing the group and considering a sneaky escape, decided against it. He made himself visible again and shuffled into the center of the group, pretending nothing had happened. They were escorted into the Woodland Palace, a majestic series of carved halls nestled into the roots of ancient trees. Clang! The great doors shut behind them with an echo of finality. Though spared a full search or prison cell, for now, the dwarves were still closely watched, with elven guards flanking them from all sides. They grumbled their way into the reception hall and plopped down on benches, muttering suspicions and conspiracy theories. After a time, Bilbo and Thorin were summoned to the royal chamber. Eric, however, had already been there for some time, speaking with the Elven King himself. "I've heard the stories," said King Thranduil, descending gracefully from his throne. "Since last year, tales have spread of a lone ranger in the Anduin Valley who stood against an orc army and helped evacuate villages. They say he traveled with a gray-cloaked wizard. I know Gandalf well," he continued. "So my question is, how did you, a single man, manage such a feat?" He studied Eric for a long moment. Eric could practically feel him scrolling through the man's mental reputation screen. Eric patted the hilt of the sword at his hip. "With this?" Thranduil's eyes gleamed. "May I?" Eric nodded. The Elven King drew the blade and admired it, the craftsmanship unmistakably fine. "A beautifully forged weapon," Thranduil mused. "Does it have a name?" "Not yet," Eric admitted. "I haven't decided." "When it does," said Thranduil, returning the sword with a flourish, "I imagine it will be a name that strikes terror into orc hearts." He returned to his throne with the fluid grace only elves could manage. Then, more seriously, he said, "Now, tell me, Orcbane, savior of the valley, master of strange magics, why have you come to the woodland realm? Seeking refuge from orc pursuit, or merely passing through?" Eric considered how to explain the tangled mess they'd landed in, but before he could open his mouth, Thranduil added, "Regardless of the reason, you are welcome here. Stay as long as you like. The woodland realm offers patience and kindness. To friends." The last word hung in the air like the snap of a bowstring. He had said nothing of the dwarves. Eric chose to be direct. "Those dwarves are my companions. We're on a mission to reclaim Erebor." Thranduil raised an eyebrow. "Ah, the Lonely Mountain. A strategically important place indeed. If the dwarves reclaim it, it could serve as a vital bulwark against the darkness." "Exactly. But I assume you haven't forgotten the slight issue of the dragon living there." "I plan to deal with the dragon," Eric said plainly. Thranduil's gaze sharpened. "You." His lips twitched like he was fighting off a smirk. A single human taking on a dragon? Absurd. Even when he himself had led a full army, he hadn't dared face Smaug head-on. It wasn't that the dragon was unbeatable, but the cost in elven lives would have been ruinous. He opened his mouth, about to offer a gentle, condescending warning, when the guards returned with Thorin and Bilbo. Bilbo looked around nervously but relaxed slightly when he saw Eric nearby. Thorin, on the other hand, strode in like he owned the palace, chin raised, eyes narrowed. Eric felt the tension in the air change the instant Thorin stepped forward. Thranduil's pleasant expression vanished. The warmth disappeared from his voice. Gone was the amiable king, what remained was cold, polished ice. Just as Eric considered gagging him with a cloth napkin, Thranduil's eye twitched. A faint crackle of magical energy danced across the air. Eric had never seen someone keep smiling and look so furious at the same time. "I've never met a dwarf so thoroughly lacking in shame," he muttered. Then, with a voice colder than the misty mountains, Thranduil declared, "If you wish to remain, then stay. Rot here for all I care. Time means little to elves." He snapped his fingers. "Lock them up." Despite all the goodwill Eric had built up, Thorin's rudeness successfully torched it in seconds. The dwarves were disarmed and escorted away under heavy guard. Bilbo, however, was spared. Thranduil, ever perceptive, saw no malice in the hobbit. He spoke to Bilbo briefly and even allowed him the freedom of the halls, much like Eric. As for the rest of the company, well, they had time to reflect. Chapter 66, Allies. Great, a teammate with the brains of a troll. Eric groaned and slapped his forehead. With the way Thorin had just mouthed off, not even Gandalf summoning 10 more great eagles could have saved them from Thranduil's volcanic temper. Frankly, the only reason the elves hadn't drawn their blades was out of a lingering sense of solidarity as fellow free folk. Honestly, Eric couldn't blame them. If roles were reversed, he probably would have tossed Thorin in a cell too, then thrown away the key for dramatic flair. If Gandalf were here, he'd be puffing his pipe with irritation and muttering something along the lines of, "Thorin, you monumental idiot." Eric tried a diplomatic approach. "Your Majesty, as you know, dwarves aren't exactly master negotiators." "I'm well aware," Thranduil interrupted coldly. "They're as stubborn as granite, and let's not forget they broke the oath first. And now Thorin has the gall to accuse me of abandoning them." His voice had taken on that regal venom that could freeze a Balrog in its tracks. "Even if I did let them go," Thranduil continued, "we'd be setting ourselves up for another tragedy, another king descending into madness." Eric had no counter-argument to that. He sighed. The dwarves had gone back on their word, and that betrayal had long poisoned elven-dwarven relations. And at the root of it all, greed. Dwarven greed, stirred and bloated by a certain dark lord with a nasty habit of handing out cursed rings like party favors. If anyone was to blame, it was Sauron. But pointing fingers wouldn't solve anything now. Still, something else had been gnawing at Eric since their conversation began. "I noticed earlier your face. You have a wound." Thranduil flinched ever so slightly. He hadn't expected Eric to bring that up. "Yes, a burn," he admitted quietly. "Dragonfire, it never fully healed." The king's face, normally immaculate, was in truth disfigured, half of it charred and raw. He usually masked it with elven glamour, but to Eric's eyes, it was more obvious. Thranduil's health bar was perpetually stuck below max. HP 2730, without a word, Eric pulled a gleaming golden apple from his satchel. The faint hum of magic caught the elven king's attention immediately. Thranduil's sharp eyes narrowed. "What is this?" "A small gift, a token of goodwill from me to you. It may help with the wound." He turned the fruit over in his palm. "It's beautiful, powerful. I can sense the magic, it radiates with healing energy, but I doubt even this could cure that." Even among elves, healing magic wasn't uncommon. Many could simply will their wounds away over time. But this scar had defied every effort. The dragon's fire had left a curse behind, a sickness that resisted even elven restoration. Eric smiled. "Still worth a try, isn't it?" Crunch. After a moment's hesitation, Thranduil bit into the apple. To his surprise, it wasn't metallic or strange, just sweet, fragrant, and strangely nostalgic. Then the magic hit him. Warmth surged through his veins, spreading to every limb. His illusion magic slipped, revealing the scorched, twisted flesh beneath. The damaged tissue began to stir, fighting back against the lingering dragon's curse. Thranduil gritted his teeth as magic and malice clashed on his skin, pain and tingling crawling across his face. But the apple's power pressed on. The healing light overwhelmed the curse, and slowly, miraculously, new skin began to knit over the wound. HP 3030. Well, looks like it worked, Eric said casually, as if he hadn't just handed the king an artifact of divine restoration. Thranduil stared in stunned silence, fingers brushing his now smooth cheek. It's gone, after all these years. It's truly healed. His voice trembled. There was a softness to it that Eric hadn't heard before. You have my deepest thanks, Eric. This wound, it has tormented me for decades. Reputation with Woodland Realm plus 500, current reputation, 1000 ally. Thranduil stood straighter, his regal tone returning. From this day forward, you are an honored ally of the Woodland Realm. Should you ever need it, we will answer your call. An oath was spoken. No fanfare, no loud declarations, just a few solemn words and a promise that carried real weight. Eric could tell by the notification in his interface. This was no idle elven courtesy. They meant it. If before the elves respected his strength, now they saw him as one of their own, a comrade worth raising arms for. I appreciate it, Eric replied. But aid goes both ways. If you ever have need, I won't turn a blind eye. Then, with a casual pivot, he added, I heard there's a gem in Erebor that used to belong to the Woodland Realm. Thranduil's expression froze. This human really didn't believe in small talk. That's no ordinary gem, the king said slowly. It has significance. I've tried to retrieve it many times, always in vain. And now that smog has taken the mountain, I've all but given up hope. What if I brought it back? Eric asked. The king raised an eyebrow. Then I would owe you a king's promise. A pause, then Thranduil added, about those dwarves, I know you traveled with them. I'll see that they're unharmed, but I can't release them, at least not yet. Not until my interests are addressed. I understand, Eric nodded. Still, not all of them are as pig-headed as Thorin. Some might actually listen to reason. I'll keep that in mind, the king replied, his tone softening slightly. Truth be told, there was no way he could just let the dwarves go. The bad blood between their races was ancient, deep, and freshly stirred. And while Eric could probably tunnel through the dungeon wall if he really wanted to, he wasn't sure what consequences that would unleash. Then again, he had a feeling someone else might handle that part for him. Their conversation ended shortly after. Eric left the throne room and flagged down a passing elf for directions. The prison wing is that way. He was just about to go check on the dwarves when a sudden burst of noise drifted from a nearby chamber. Curious, Eric followed the sound until he found a group of elves chatting animatedly near a large storeroom. We're preparing for the festival, someone was saying. A familiar voice rang out behind him. You're just in time. Eric turned to see Legolas casually tossing a fruit up and down in one hand. Festival? Eric asked. The Starfall Feast, Legolas explained. An old tradition. It's set for 7 days from now. You're welcome to attend. Eric shook his head. Tempting, but I've got business. Gandalf and I are meeting in Dol Guldur 7 days from today. Besides, partying while your companions are rotting in elven jail didn't sit right, even if said companions did kind of deserve it. Still, his worries were about to be interrupted. Someone had come looking for him. Bilbo. Chapter 67, Dynamic Sword Skills. Eric politely turned down Legolas's invitation to join him, instead following Bilbo to a quiet, secluded hallway within the Woodland Realm. Once they were alone, Eric asked straight to the point. What happened? I went to visit Thorin and the others, Bilbo said with a weary sigh. The moment he'd stepped away from Thranduil's throne room, he'd gone straight to check on the imprisoned dwarves. Running into Eric on the way back had been something of a happy accident. After giving a brief update on the dwarves' condition, Bilbo hesitated, then added, Actually, Thorin asked me to do something. Eric raised a brow. And did you agree? Well, I haven't said yes yet, Bilbo admitted, scratching his curly head. It's a tricky situation, really, and I wasn't sure what to do. That's why I came to ask you. I needed a second opinion. Eric didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out toward the towering trees of the Elven Kingdom and said, seemingly off-topic, 7 days from now, the Woodland Realm will host the Starfall Feast. Every elf will be there, including the prison guards, and they'll be drunk as dwarves in a brewery. Bilbo blinked. What's that got to do with? I trust your judgment, Bilbo, Eric said, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. During the feast, I'll have to slip away for a while. Actually, I might be gone for several days, maybe longer. He rummaged through his pack and pulled out a golden apple, gleaming with a smooth, magical sheen. This, he said, handing it over, has powerful healing properties. It can cure nearly any wound. Bilbo's eyes widened. Oh no, this is clearly far too valuable. You should keep it. You're the one always getting into fights. You'll need it more than I will, Eric said gently. Bilbo stared at the apple, then at Eric. For a moment, words failed him. He opened his mouth once, twice, and finally just nodded. All right, I understand now. Thank you, Eric, he said sincerely. I know what I have to do, I will do it. Eric's trust had rekindled a fire in Bilbo's heart. The hobbit who once longed only for tea and quiet evenings was gone. What remained was someone with conviction, someone who had made a promise to his friends. I said I'd help them take back their home, and I meant it. I'm glad to hear that, Eric replied, smiling. There were still 7 days until the Starfall Feast. After parting ways with Bilbo, Eric went to visit the dwarves himself, asking how they were holding up and what they were planning. Couldn't you just dig us a tunnel or something? One dwarf muttered hopefully. Eric glanced at the elven guards standing by the cell entrance and shrugged. Oh, I could dig a way out, sure, but getting you all past those guards, that's another story entirely. He could, of course, bulldoze through the defenses and forcibly extract the dwarves. But best case scenario, that would damage Thranduil's reputation. Worst case, it could spark an outright war. You won't rot in here forever, Eric said, lowering his voice. Don't forget there's more than one person out there who hasn't given up on you. The dwarves looked at one another in silent agreement. They all knew who the other person was. Thorin had already asked Bilbo for help. The elves were the only ones still in the dark. This isn't the end of your journey, Eric said with a knowing look. Trust me. The dwarves straightened, reassured. They just had to wait now, wait for their thief in the night. What about you, Eric? Killy asked. I've got a few things to take care of, he replied. But if all goes well, I'll meet you again soon. All right. With the dwarves more or less covered, Eric left the dungeons and wandered through the grand halls of the Elven Kingdom. Then he paused mid-step. Oh right, I almost forgot. He immediately flagged down an elven guide and requested a tour of the palace. As they moved through the elegantly carved stone corridors and moonlit bridges, he quietly took note of every crafting station, storage room, and forge. Crafting recipes for woodland elven gear, unlocked, Eric grinned. One more collection for the compendium. You could never have too many blueprints. The more the merrier. To be honest, most elven gear didn't differ much in function, just style. Fancy patterns, elegant flourishes, but the stats were pretty standard. Still, something else caught his eye. Not gear, training. Scattered across the palace courtyards were elves engaged in swordplay. Unlike the peaceful valley of Rivendell, where swords were ceremonial more than practical, the woodland realm trained constantly. Their proximity to danger meant they had to stay sharp. These elves weren't just good, they were very good. Their precise movements and dazzling swordplay reminded Eric of a mod he'd once installed back home. And now that he thought about it, the system always seemed to respond to exposure. Every time he encountered a new culture or weapon style, a corresponding mod was unlocked. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Eric spotted a familiar face. Legolas. The prince was training with focused intensity, frustration written all over him. His blade danced through the air, elegant and deadly. Wow, Eric muttered, impressed. Hearing him, Legolas halted and turned. Thank you, he said curtly, though I doubt my swordsmanship compares to the legendary warrior of the wilds. Eric winced. That's flattering. Legolas took a step forward, serious. If you have time, I would request your guidance in battle techniques. Eric scratched the back of his head, awkward. What was he supposed to teach? Eat a golden apple, chug a potion, and run in swinging? Or maybe hide behind obsidian and spam explosives. Honestly, most of his tricks weren't worth using on basic orcs. They were reserved for bosses, the big ones. I'm afraid I don't really know any formal swordplay, Eric confessed. Never studied technique, mostly I just swing really hard. Legolas looked baffled. You're saying you never trained? Nope, I specialize in brute force and occasional blind luck. The elf prince looked at him as if trying to decode a very unusual creature. Well, then allow me to teach you something for once, Legolas offered. I can demonstrate several forms: sword, dagger, bow, unarmed combat, even evasive maneuvers, whatever you wish. That sounds great, Eric said with a grin. Legolas handed him a practice sword, and just like that, their impromptu training session began. At first, Eric was a little nervous. He wasn't sure how to hold back properly. He didn't want to accidentally knock Legolas into a wall or a tree, but those worries quickly vanished, because he couldn't land a single hit. Seriously, it was like trying to duel a breeze with perfect footwork and impossible reflexes. Eric wasn't human anymore, technically, but even he couldn't keep up. If this had been a real fight with real stakes, Eric had plenty of tricks to turn the tables. But in a straight-up swordplay contest, he was outclassed. Clang! Once again, Legolas parried his strike and exposed a weak spot in his stance. Then the prince stepped back, lowering his blade. That concludes the first lesson, he said politely. And right on cue, mod unlocked, dynamic sword skills. It worked. Eric's eyes lit up with excitement. He hadn't expected that to actually trigger a mod, but there it was. Legolas, oblivious to the floating interface, continued speaking. What I showed you were only the fundamentals. You'll only master them through experience. But someone like you, who's fought on real battlefields, should adapt quickly. You're absolutely right, Eric nodded while opening his skill panel. Dynamic Sword Skills Mod. Skill unlocked. Basic Swordplay LV 1. In-game, this ability let you automatically track enemies in combat without manual aiming. Here, it translated to enhanced focus and sharper perception during battle. Further skills in the mod would require skill orbs, which were dropped by defeating enemies. So basically, if Eric wanted to grow stronger, he just had to keep swinging. I understand everything now, he said with a grin. Chapter 68, Shadows over Dol Guldur. Eric handed Legolas a golden apple. It wasn't much, really, but for someone like Eric, who had just been gifted an entire swordsmanship module and a personal crash course from the Prince of the Woodland Realm, it felt appropriate. Elves seemed to love the shiny fruit. Elegant, rare, and surprisingly practical, the golden apple was a hit. He had been handing out quite a few of these apples lately, but honestly, what else did he have? His inventory wasn't exactly overflowing with gift options, and the golden apples were abundant enough to share. Legolas, for his part, looked pleased with the gift, though he did raise an eyebrow a few days later when Eric stopped coming to the training grounds. Still, the elven prince couldn't really complain. Eric had taken to wandering the surrounding woods, chopping down spiders and stray orcs with the enthusiasm of a man harvesting cabbages. Though he often muttered strange phrases like "gotta grind loot" and "low drop rate again," his actions spoke louder than words. The elves took notice, and even if they didn't understand his terminology, they respected what he was doing. His efforts clearly benefited the Woodland Realm, and that was enough to earn their quiet approval. This drop rate's brutal. Deep in the forest, Eric sliced through yet another spider and frowned. He had exterminated over 100 of the 8-legged horrors in recent days, clearing out multiple nests, and now his inventory was overflowing with spider eyes. Unfortunately, all that effort had only earned him a second-level upgrade to his sword skills and a single dodge skill orb. He sheathed his sword with a sigh and began making his way back toward the Elven King's halls. Tomorrow was the Starfall Feast, and it was also the agreed-upon day to regroup. As he approached the palace, Eric paused. A strange feeling tugged at him. I've noticed a large number of orcs massing near the eastern edge of the forest, he reported to Thranduil later. They seemed to be searching for something. That was concerning. The eastern border led toward the river Running and Lake Town, a key trade route for the Woodland Realm. Orcs lurking there could only mean trouble. Eric wasted no time. Upon returning, he delivered the intelligence directly to King Thranduil. King Thranduil assured him the matter would be taken seriously. Without delay, Eric then set out for Dol Guldur. The next day, the Starfall feast began. The palace bustled with elven merriment. Barrels of fine wine were rolled into the hall, and cups were raised high. Music filled the air. Spirits soared. Then came the news that soured it all. The dwarves escaped. The moment those words reached Thranduil, he stopped mid-sip and set down his goblet. "Legolas," the king said calmly, "lead a patrol, head toward the river's mouth and deal with any orcs you find." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "Make sure they don't ruin our feast." Legolas tilted his head slightly. "And the dwarves, let them drift downriver," Thranduil said coolly. "Their fate no longer concerns me. Alive or dead, it makes no difference." Then, as the prince turned to leave, the king added, "Bring back a live orc if you can. I have questions that need answers." Legolas nodded without protest and departed with a squadron of elven warriors. Thranduil remained on his throne, deep in thought. Dol Guldur, once a settlement of the Sylvan Elves, it had been abandoned after the Great Migrations in the Second Age. In recent centuries, however, darkness claimed it. A dark power had claimed the ruined fortress. Outwardly, it looked silent and dead. No sound, no movement, just crumbling stone and tangled roots, but this was deception. This lifeless facade was a calculated deception. Even the rumors of a necromancer were likely part of the ruse, meant to sow confusion and buy time for preparation. Eric stepped lightly over rotting leaves and brittle twigs, approaching the blackened gates of Dol Guldur. "Gandalf," he called out, "running late again?" "No," the voice came behind. The voice came from behind a stone pillar. Gandalf emerged, his gray robes billowing in the cold breeze, and beside him stood another wizard in brown attire. The brown wizard had bird droppings on his shoulder and an agitated squirrel on his head. Radagast. "A wizard is never late," Gandalf intoned with his usual dramatic flair. "Exactly," Radagast chirped. "With my rabbits, everyone else is just slow." Gandalf leaned in close. "Eric, I'm nearly certain the enemy is here." The three huddled, voices low. "There's a concealment spell over the entire fortress," Gandalf said. "That tells us he hasn't regained full strength. He's still hiding, biding his time." Gandalf turned to Radagast carefully. "Radagast," Gandalf continued, "you must go to Lothlorien, ask the lady for aid. We need reinforcements and fast. Just don't follow us inside," he added with firm eyes. "Eric and I will investigate alone," Radagast blinked. "So I'm the messenger now, huh?" Gandalf smiled. "You're the fastest, that counts." "Fine, fine," the brown wizard grumbled quietly. The brown wizard climbed aboard his absurdly fast rabbit sled. "I'll be back before supper." With that, he was gone in a blur of fur and squeaking wheels. Eric turned to Gandalf. "So, we're going in alone?" "There's no other option," Gandalf said, drawing his gleaming blade, Glamdring while clutching his staff in hand. "We must understand what Sauron is planning." Eric's hand hovered near his own sword. "You sure we shouldn't wait for backup? There's no time. If he's truly here, we can't delay. We can't allow him to prepare in silence." Eric hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but the second things get weird, we run. Deal?" "Deal," Gandalf said solemnly. "I'm not throwing away life." They moved cautiously through the main gate. Inside Dol Guldur, the world felt wrong. The sky above never changed. No sun, no moon, just a permanent gray gloom everywhere. As they crept deeper, Eric noticed the cages. Rusting iron cells lined the walls, filled with bones, some human, some not. The victims had long perished, but torture lingered. It wasn't about information or control. The orcs had simply enjoyed the cruelty. Gandalf stopped beneath one cage, gazing up at it with haunted eyes. He spoke quietly about Thrain. "This is where I found Thrain," he said quietly. "He'd been missing for 5 years, tortured until he forgot his name. He gave me the map and key. Then died shortly after." Eric looked around, his fingers tightening on the hilt of his sword, and then a blur of shadow streaked past. Eric spun, weapon half-drawn, nothing there. Gandalf turned to speak, but before the words left his lips, a blade materialized behind him, lunging for his heart. Clang! Two swords met the shadow's weapon at once. Eric's nameless blade and Gandalf's glamdring, perfectly in sync. Chapter 69. The Nazgul, a shadow flickered into being, tall, cloaked, and barely more than a smudge in the air itself. The world itself hesitated to recognize its presence. Nazgul, Gandalf said grimly. The creature responded with an inhuman shriek, a soul-scouring wail that could have erupted straight from Mordor's depths. Then it lunged. Eric and Gandalf moved instantly. The wizard ducked low, his robes sweeping out behind him, while Eric slipped sideways like a ghost, narrowly avoiding the strike completely. A loud crack echoed as Gandalf raised his staff, sending a burst of white light into the Nazgul's chest. It reeled. Eric didn't hesitate. He drew his elven-forged sword fast. He slashed forward, the blade bursting into flame as it cleaved through shadowy robes. The Nazgul howled in agony, fire licking up its form. It staggered, retreating into shadow pools. "Good thing we're both carrying elven-blessed weapons," Gandalf said. "A normal sword would pass straight through." Eric nodded, still tense. "Useful tip, bit late." "Behind you," Gandalf shouted suddenly. Eric felt it first, a whisper brushing his ear, a sigh colder than death itself. The air thickened with rot and decay, as though a crypt had exhaled. The crypt had exhaled right into his lungs. Fear, fives wither, fives poison, fives snap out of it. Gandalf's voice cut through the darkness sharply and clearly. A blinding flash burst from Gandalf's staff, sweeping through Eric's body and cleansing the effects. He shuddered as warmth returned to his limbs. With a growl, he struck out. He spun around and struck out with his blade. Too slow. The Nazgul had already vanished into the dark. The comforting aura of Gandalf's firing glowed steadily beside him. Courage trickled back into Eric's soul, banishing the lingering dread. "What was that?" Eric muttered, keeping close to Gandalf. "The black breath," Gandalf replied, eyes scanning the shadows carefully. "A foul curse of the Nazgul. It sickens the mind and body. If you're struck by a Morgul blade while under its influence and left untreated, you'll fade slowly. You'll slowly fade into a wraith yourself. I suspect those Barrow-wights we encountered earlier suffered the same fate." Eric clenched his jaw. Fantastic. They were no longer merely alert. They were hunting and hunted. Every flicker of shadow, every gust of wind became suspect. Eric wasn't used to feeling vulnerable. Ever since crafting his full netherite armor set, he'd felt invincible. He'd felt like a walking fortress. But this fight reminded him, no matter how tough your gear is, you can't block a scream that shatters your thoughts or curses. You can't block a curse that crawls into your lungs. "Time for some real wizardry," he said, glancing at Gandalf. Gandalf didn't disappoint. He raised his staff, murmuring ancient words. He murmured ancient words that prickled across Eric's skin. "Let the darkness be revealed." A pulse of radiant light burst outward, more potent than any detection spell Eric had seen. It swept across the courtyard and revealed them. Nine Nazgul, forced into visibility by the spell, shrieked in rage as their spectral forms were exposed to the world around them. Eric didn't waste the opportunity. He charged forward, flame blade blazing, and delivered 2 rapid strikes to the nearest Nazgul. His sword cleaved through ethereal armor and set the wraith ablaze. That one was gone, dissolved into the air like smoke, but they didn't die. Gandalf had warned him. The Nazgul were tethered to the One Ring. They had no mortal forms. They had no mortal forms to kill, only shells to shatter. Their spirits would return. Gandalf followed up with a thunderous blast that staggered another, but it merely vanished into shadows. It vanished into the shadows once more, biding its time. The remaining 7 moved swiftly. 3 targeted Gandalf. 4 stalked toward Eric. Thanks to the power of the fire ring, their black breath held no sway. No poison, no fear, no curses, but their blades were another matter. These were once kings, mighty rulers of men. Their strength and skill in combat had not faded at all. Though enslaved to darkness, their warrior instincts were still lethal. Eric fought with razor-sharp focus. He parried, ducked, and struck, keeping the 4 Nazgul at bay. His swordplay, honed through countless battles, held strong. His swordplay, boosted by combat potions, allowed him to hang on by a thread. Then it happened. The tallest Nazgul let out a shriek so piercing that Eric's mind reeled instantly. The sound tore through his thoughts like a dagger. He staggered. A Morgul blade flashed. Clang, his armor held but barely. The cursed sword slipped past the chest plate's edge completely. The cursed sword slashed across his side. -3 wither. 5s, Morgul poison. Infinity, the pain was bearable. The curse wasn't. A shard of the Morgul blade had broken off inside the wound. Darkness spread from it like ink in water. Eric's chest tightened and his vision blurred. He stumbled back. What is this stuff? Eric, Gandalf roared, sending a shockwave toward the Nazgul. Gandalf sent a shockwave toward the Nazgul, knocking it away. Eric struck again blindly and managed to connect. The flames flared up, driving the creature into the darkness. Run, Gandalf commanded urgently. Gandalf didn't need to say it twice. Eric sprinted after him, popping the cork off a bottle of Minecraft milk mid-run and chugging it down. Instantly, his status cleared completely. The poison, curse, and withering vanished. His mind snapped back into clarity. Wait, whoa! Thud! A massive hammer slammed into the ground where they'd just been. Orcs surged forward, weapons raised high. At their head stood a pale-skinned, brutal figure in iron armor. Azog, you again, Eric groaned. Didn't I crush you last week? Azog sneered. Today you die, human. You talk too much. Eric narrowly dodged another hammer blow, then traded several strikes with the pale orc. Azog grunted in frustration. This human was stronger than before. Snarling, Azog backed off and barked a command. All of you, kill them. Eric saw the orcs closing in, rows upon rows of iron-armored soldiers. The Nazgul emerged again, some on ledges, some behind the crowd, watching silently and menacingly. Time to go full Minecraft, Eric muttered, pulling out a golden apple and chewing it like a snack. He followed up with several potions: speed, strength, regeneration, all tier 2 potions. He'd been saving them for emergencies. This counted. Speed II, strength II, regeneration II. He flexed his fingers. He could probably punch a troll through a wall now. Eric, to me, Gandalf called, reaching out. Eric hesitated. He was itching to see how many orcs he could flatten, but Gandalf didn't wait. He grabbed Eric's cloak. Flash, a burst of white light consumed them, and the battlefield vanished. Chapter 70, Sauron. Gandalf, you had that kind of trick up your sleeve the whole time, and you let me gulp down all those potions for nothing. Eric's voice echoed across the corridor. Eric's voice echoed across the ancient stone corridor as the two dashed for their lives. His face was a mix of disbelief and frustration. You could have used that escape magic 10 minutes ago. I wouldn't have chugged half a brewery. The old wizard beside him chuckled awkwardly, staff in hand, legs surprisingly spry. Ah, well, yes. That sort of thing isn't exactly something I can do often. It's not without consequences, you see. Consequences? Eric shot him a side glance. Like, your hair gets frizzier each time or what? Gandalf's expression remained somewhat mysterious and evasive. Gandalf grunted, choosing not to dignify that with a response. Behind them, a roar thundered through the caverns, and the sound of hundreds of orc boots filled the corridors. Gandalf spun mid-run, slammed his staff against the stone floor, and the tower behind them gave a mighty crack. The topmost section shattered, raining down heavy rubble that flattened pursuers. The topmost section flattened the first wave of pursuing orcs and collapsed the tunnel entrance in one satisfying, booming crash. Nice shot, Eric muttered, just before the air in front twisted. A tendril of black mist slithered through the cracked ceiling, pooling and thickening ahead. Then, without warning boom, a colossal illusion burst into existence, a ghostly eye hovering over the floor. A ghostly eye hovering over the stone floor like a watchful god. In its fiery iris stood a burning humanoid shape, wreathed in flame and shadow. Sauron. Eric stopped dead. Eric stopped dead in his tracks. Gandalf stopped breathing for a second. There was no health bar over this one. No stats. Nothing to indicate its level, weakness, or even touchability. Nothing to indicate if it could be hit, which could only mean one thing. Great, Eric muttered. It's a ghost boss with admin rights. He still had a few seconds left on buffs. He still had a few seconds left on his potion buffs, so naturally, his gamer instincts kicked in. He munched on a golden apple. The shadow within the eye spoke, voice low and ancient. The shadow spoke, voice low and ancient, every word rippling through the air like a cold wind. There is no light that can outshine the darkness, wizard. Then the mist surged forward violently. Then the mist surged forward like a tidal wave, targeting Eric rather than Gandalf, as if Sauron had already pegged him as the more annoying of the two. Eric didn't think. He swung. With a sharp clang, his elven-forged blade sliced through the mist, parting it like fabric. The tendrils scattered harmlessly into vapor. Huh, he blinked. I did not expect that to work. A mortal, the eye flared slightly. No, something else, but it matters not, you stay here. The black fog erupted outward, engulfing the buildings and twisting their forms into rubble. Gandalf quickly raised his staff again, conjuring a dome of radiant light that held the darkness at bay. Everything outside the barrier was instantly obliterated. Buildings turned to dust. Only the platform remained. Only the platform beneath their feet remained intact. "Run, get help," Gandalf shouted, face strained as he poured more of his energy into the shield. "I'll hold him off." Eric looked at the wizard. Eric looked at the wizard, then down at his sword, then back up at the swirling apocalyptic storm. His potion buffs were about to expire. "Are you serious right now?" he muttered aloud. "I didn't drink all those potions to just stand around like a spectator." Before Gandalf could stop him, Eric leapt forward, locked eyes with the flaming silhouette inside the illusion. Eric locked eyes with the flaming silhouette and swung his sword in a wild, arcing strike. Clang! The impact jarred his arms to the bone. It felt like hitting bedrock with a butter knife. The blade that had never once dulled now had a visible dent in its edge. But the strike worked. Sauron flinched. Just a bit. The flames around the eye flickered and mist pulsed. Sauron was not pleased. With a roar of fury, the black fog expanded tenfold, consuming the skies. The entire world went dark. Visibility dropped to 0. Eric stared into endless shadow. Eric found himself staring into an endless sea of shadow. Then they appeared. 9 wraiths, cloaked in shadow, emerged from the burning eye. The Nazgul. Reforged by Sauron's power, their forms solidified. Their forms were far more solid than before, cloaked in swirling black energy that gave them an almost boss-like presence. Each one pulsed with corrupted might. "Fantastic," Eric hissed. "We've triggered a raid." Gandalf's shield faltered under the new pressure. The light dimmed. His staff cracked slightly under the weight of holding back the dark. Eric panicked in the most rational way possible completely. Eric dropped a stack of TNT behind him, flicked out a flint, and started building a wall of cobblestone in front of them to absorb the blast. Boom, boom, the explosions lit shadows. The explosions lit up the shadows, blasting 3 Nazgul apart temporarily and opening a gap in the mist. Only temporarily. The moment their forms dispersed, they began to reform, even stronger than before. It was like fighting off zombies next to a spawn cage you couldn't break. "This is why I don't play on hardcore mode," Eric muttered through gritted teeth. Gandalf glanced at him questioningly. Gandalf, clearly out of magical gas, glanced at him with a raised brow, silently asking if he had any more bright ideas. Eric raised an eyebrow in return. "Do I look like I brought a howitzer?" "Wait, actually, he kind of had. Take this." Eric dug into his inventory pouch and pulled out a shimmering purple-black pearl. He handed it to the wizard. "A stone?" Gandalf asked, blinking rapidly. "Ender pearl," Eric said. "You throw it, it teleports you to wherever it lands, like a magical, get the heck out of here grenade." Gandalf looked unconvinced, but before he could argue, something happened. Before he could argue, the glow of his staff finally sputtered out. The shield dropped. The darkness pressed in instantly. Sauron's presence now towered like a mountain over them, pressing down hard. Sauron's presence pressed down so hard Eric felt like his lungs were being stomped on. The staff trembled under the strain. Cracks webbed through it. Somehow it held. Barely. "All right, I'll make a door." "All right, I'll make a door," Eric said, spinning around and stacking TNT again, this time with a purpose. He lit it up and began building another wall for protection. But Sauron saw this. But Sauron had seen this trick before. A tendril of shadow shot forward and smacked the primed TNT far away before it could detonate. But that was where Sauron made his mistake completely. Eric had already swapped to a fishing rod. He flicked his wrist. The line latched onto the flying TNT and yanked it back midair. Physics says no, Eric said smugly. Kaboom, the explosion tore through. The explosion was much closer this time, tearing a hole through the fog and exposing the exit beyond. Gandalf didn't wait. He hurled the pearl. It vanished in a flash of purple particles. Eric tossed his a second later. The black mist surged one last time, colliding with them just as they vanished in a burst of teleportation magic. But the escape wasn't clean at all. Gandalf was thrown into a stone wall, coughing but otherwise intact. Eric wasn't so lucky. Sauron's fury zeroed in on him. The Dark Lords will crashed into Eric like a siege weapon. One blow after another sent him smashing through walls, pillars, towers, each crash ripping chunks off his health bar. He hadn't taken this kind of beating since he got mobbed by wither skeletons. He hadn't taken this beating since he got mobbed by a horde of wither skeletons wearing Thorn's armor in the nether. Chugging golden apples like candy, he tossed back every healing item. He tossed back every healing item he had. Even broke out his last 2 Lemba's bread rations, which were supposed to be emergency rations. If not for his stash of recovery gear, he'd be paced. If not for his stash of recovery gear, he would have been paced on the floor by now. Sauron prepared for one last, devastating strike, his form coalescing with shadowed fury, and then Eric vanished. And then Eric vanished in a sparkle of purple, his pearl finally taking effect. Chapter 71, the song speeds up. Ouch, my ankle, I think I twisted it. Gandalf yelped as he landed, stumbling forward. Gandalf stumbled forward in a hopping limp that made him look less like a mighty wizard and more like a cranky old goat on bad terrain. Eric, on the other hand, brushed off dust. Eric brushed off a bit of dust and stood up straight, barely scratched. Thanks to his feather-falling enchantment and the pearl teleportation system he'd fine-tuned, his descent damage was reduced to decimals. His descent damage was reduced to decimal points. "You don't look particularly injured," he said flatly, eyeing the wizard suspiciously. "If you knew what it cost to cast that escape spell, you'd be limping too." "If you knew what it cost, you'd be limping too," Gandalf muttered, leaning heavily on his staff. "The toll is mostly metaphysical." "Right, I totally believe you're metaphysically bruised," Eric replied, crossing his arms. "You didn't even lose health, you'll live." Gandalf scowled, then suddenly clutched his back. "And my spine disagrees." Eric sighed, pulled out a shimmering golden apple from his inventory, and tossed it. Gandalf caught it with a flick of his wrist and took a bite. "Bless the creators," Gandalf murmured as he bit into it. Warmth radiated through his body, and a soft golden shimmer enveloped him. A protective shield formed around him, golden particles settling like stardust on his cloak. "This fruit is miraculous. A little spark of my strength just came back." "Good, then let's get moving." They began sprinting. As they began sprinting through the dense forest, the air behind them darkened unnaturally. From the direction of Dol Guldur, a great shadow bloomed like a storm cloud, curling and writhing across the treetops. Down, Eric tackled Gandalf to the ground just as a wall of black smoke roared overhead. The wizard reacted quickly, erecting a translucent barrier with a flick of his staff. It formed a dome. It formed a small dome, shielding them as the malevolent mist swept over, ripping up entire trees and tearing at the earth like a living thing. The darkness moved on without discovering them at all. Eric raised his head cautiously. "I think they lost us." "Only for now," Gandalf said grimly, getting to his feet. "Look." From the ruins of Dol Guldur poured an army of orcs and wargs. From the ruins poured an army of orcs and wargs. Thousands of them. It was as if the fortress had exploded with malice, spewing out wave after wave of monstrous soldiers. Towering trolls stomped among them. Towering trolls stomped among them, and skeletal banners fluttered in the dark wind. Leading the horde was a pale, towering figure on a monstrous warg. Eric's gaze locked on him. "Azog," he muttered. Gandalf's expression darkened. "They're heading north, toward Erebor. That's where this tide is flowing." Smaug already made his deal with Sauron. "Now they're going for full conquest," Eric said. Looks like the war's starting early. I must rejoin Lady Galadriel. I must rejoin Lady Galadriel and the others. We need to strike Dol Guldur again while their main force is away, Gandalf said. Then he paused, turning to Eric. And you, Eric hesitated. Me, I think I've used up. Me, I think I've used up my usefulness. You saw it. I couldn't do anything to Sauron. I disagree, Gandalf said, eyes shining with certainty. You can, you just haven't realized it yet. But before Eric could respond, something happened. Gandalf shifted the topic with sharp focus. For now, there's somewhere you're needed more than here. Let me guess. Erebor? Gandalf nodded. Back in Lake Town, the atmosphere was less grim. And more awkward. Killy sat on a wooden chair in Bard's modest home, flexing his freshly healed leg with wonder. It doesn't even hurt anymore. That's amazing. Toriel, Bilbo, thank you both. Earlier, while traveling through Mirkwood, Killy had been struck by a Morgul arrow. Bilbo had used one of Eric's golden apples to suppress the spreading corruption. Toriel applied Kingsfell to purge the last of the poison. Bilbo waved dismissively. Don't thank me. The apple came from Eric. He's the one who deserves the credit. So he saved me again? Killy looked troubled. Before he could spiral into emotional reflection, Thorin strode in. We'll repay him, but first we must continue to Erebor. Legolas, standing nearby with arms crossed, raised an eyebrow. You dwarves still plan to march on the mountain. It's our home. Of course we're going, Thorin shot back, bristling. And what does that have to do with you, elf? Perhaps we were just making sure you weren't planning anything suicidal, Legolas replied coolly. We're not going back with you if that's what you're thinking. We might be unarmed, but we're not surrendering. I was not given any order to bring you back, Legolas replied, his frown deepening completely. Toriel stepped in, her voice calm. We were tracking an orc warband that led us here, but they withdrew for some reason, so our mission ends here. Thorin glanced at her, then at Killy, whose ears had gone red. He grimaced. This nephew of mine, he really is into her, isn't he? Maybe it was time for some counseling or a reminder. Or maybe just a reminder that there were barely any female dwarves to begin with. Shaking his head, Thorin turned to the others. If no one's dying, we leave at dawn. We leave for Erebor at dawn. Philly leaned over. Shouldn't we wait for Gandalf and Eric? We can wait at the mountain, Thorin replied. But I won't waste another day in this town. But we don't have weapons. If something happens on the way. Philly's concern hung in the air as Thorin considered the situation they were facing on their journey ahead to the mountain. Something will happen, Thorin said, matter-of-factly. That didn't comfort anyone. Legolas and Toriel exchanged a glance. They had no idea what the dwarves were planning, but it was suspiciously optimistic. Bard, standing nearby, frowned as well. You plan to leave? There's no forge here, no weapons to buy. Yes, well, Balin said, rubbing his beard, we were just discussing that. We've stayed long enough, another dwarf added. Balin, trying to change the subject, pointed toward a peculiar object behind Bard. Say, that drying rack of yours looks rather sturdy. That's not a drying rack, Bard replied flatly. Oh, it's a relic. My father left it to me. The dwarves blinked in confusion. A relic, like a family sword? A black arrow, Bard said, almost reverently, running his hand along the gleaming shaft. He used one just like it when Smaug first attacked Dale. He struck him clean through the chest, or so he swore. You're the heir to Dale's lord? Balin's voice was low, reverent. He stepped forward, inspecting the weapon. His eyes widened. This wasn't just a story. The black arrow had dwarven craftsmanship all over it. Ancient runes etched into the shaft, a strange magical resonance humming beneath the surface. It was said such arrows never missed and always returned to their wielder completely. Though no one could prove that last part. You know, Balin said softly, that's not what the legends say. If the dragon was truly struck, why does he still haunt Erebor? Bard stiffened. He was hit, my father never lied. He wounded the beast, I swear it. Easy there, Balin said, patting his arm. I believe you. He looked once more at the arrow. It's sharp enough to pierce dragonhide. I'd wager it left a scar at least, but Smog is still alive, so whatever damage your father did, it wasn't enough. Bard looked down, fists clenched. You and your father both fought bravely. There's no shame in the outcome. You have nothing to prove, not to me or anyone else. Balin's voice dropped lower. What matters now is protecting the people who are still alive, not chasing ghosts of the past. Chapter 72, The March and the Molten Wall. The orc armies of Moria moved earlier than expected. Gandalf, freed from Sauron's grip far sooner than in the original flow of events, now stood impatiently near the forest edge, waiting for the White Council's support completely. The dwarves, meanwhile, had already set out toward Erebor, pushing their own plans into motion. The tempo of the story had accelerated, just like Eric's footsteps. "This isn't right," he muttered, eyes narrowing as he picked his way up. He picked his way up a grassy knoll. At this rate, the orc horde's going to hit the mountain before the dragons even dealt with. The timeline was unraveling. But why? The only deviation he could think of was himself. He had broken Gandalf out earlier, which meant the wizard never endured Sauron's torture. As a result, the Dark Lord's plans were exposed prematurely. Perhaps sensing danger, Sauron had abandoned subtlety and preparation, choosing instead to launch immediately. Choosing instead to launch an all-out assault on Erebor immediately. Now, standing on a ridge overlooking a broad plain near the Woodland Realm's border, Eric stared grimly at the massing black tide below. Thousands of orcs, more than just Moria's ranks. Every feral band from the surrounding wilds must have been rounded up and herded into this monstrous force. The sky itself seemed darker above them, the sun filtering through clouds that reeked of ash and iron. A cluster of movement caught attention. Squinting, Eric spotted a group slipping into the main body of the army. One particularly tall orc trotted forward to report to a pale, brutish figure at the front of the horde. Azog, and the newcomer was unmistakable. "Bolg," Eric muttered, "the family reunion begins." Two generals now commanded the horde, father and son, one to lead, the other to strike where it hurt. Eric's fingers curled around the hilt of his sword. He recalled an old legend. From the First Age. They said the blade once belonged to Ecthelion of the Fountain, Lord of Gondolin. In the final battle before Gondolin's fall, Ecthelion used it to slit the throats of over 1,000 orcs completely. He used it to slit throats, slew 2 war chiefs, and even took down 3 Balrogs before falling alongside Gothmog himself. That kind of story would be laughed off as fiction anywhere else. But here, it still echoed with weight. Even now, 2 ages later, orcs trembled at the name Ecthelion. Some flinched at the sight of Orcrist alone. Eric smirked. That elf lord must have been an absolute beast. Honestly, the way the tale was told, Ecthelion might have been stronger. Ecthelion might have even been stronger than he was. Not that Eric intended to let that stand. "Still," he murmured, glancing back at the heaving tide of enemies, "today's not the day. If it were just a few hundred, maybe 1,000, he'd try. If it were just 1,000, he'd try something stupid. But tens of thousands? Even Minecraft tricks couldn't save him from being dogpiled. There wouldn't be space to dig a tunnel, let alone escape through one. He could go for a surgical strike. He could try to take out Azog or Bolg, but it wasn't the right moment. The risk outweighed the gain. No, the priority was Erebor. If he got there early, maybe he could set something up. Anything. Far off in Lake Town, Thorin was thinking. Far off in the fishing town of Lake Town, Thorin Oakenshield was thinking the same thing. That night, under the cloak of darkness, the dwarves slipped past Bard's house and crept along the cobbled alleys. The town's armory loomed ahead, its windows shuttered. And guards lazily patrolling nearby. "Thorin, this feels wrong," Bilbo whispered nervously, hunched low behind a crate. "It's not our property, technically," he added. "We're stealing." "We're borrowing, Mr. Baggins," Thorin replied. "We're borrowing, Mr. Baggins," Thorin replied, already halfway through the armory's window. "And we're borrowing with a righteous purpose." He emerged moments later with a sword in hand, examining it with a nod of approval. "I made inquiries. The master is corrupt. The master of this town and his guards are more concerned with gold than honor. These weapons would have rusted under their care. We're giving them purpose again. Thorin's justification hung in the air as preparations continued. The other dwarves moved quickly, choosing their arms. Within minutes, they melted into the shadows once more. The whole operation was done before the town rooster even thought about crowing. By sunrise, they were already gone. Unfortunately, the fallout came fast. "Bard," a smug voice called out. He turned to see Alfred, the master's weaselly right-hand man, blocking his path. Alfred wore a self-satisfied grin. Bard raised a brow. "What do you want?" "Oh, just a little chat," Alfred replied, clapping his hands. A squad of guards stepped forward. "There's been a break-in, weapons stolen from the armory, and I have reason to believe you had something to do with it. Or at least someone you've been protecting." Bard's jaw tightened. "I didn't steal anything. Maybe not, but you're coming with us either way." Alfred gestured dramatically. "Take him." "I knew this day would come," Bard muttered, balling his fists. He looked over at his son. "Bane, look after the house." Without resisting, Bard allowed himself to be shackled and led away. Some things couldn't be avoided. Meanwhile, far to the north, Eric stood before Ereber's main gate, holding a diamond pickaxe. He gave the enormous stone door a solid knock. And then knocked again, with force. With a low, groaning rumble, the centuries-old gate cracked and swung open. Eric slid inside with the stealth of a practiced adventurer. He stopped inside the entrance, gazing at the destruction. The entire front gate had once been a thick stone wall, several meters thick. And Smaug, that fiery tyrant, had smashed through it like it was cardboard. To stop something like that, they'd need a wall several dozen meters thick, enchanted. And probably blessed by at least 5 valor. Smaug, by Eric's estimation, was likely snoozing deep in the vaults. There was a long tunnel between here and the treasure hall. If that tunnel could be blocked, maybe the beast could be contained. Eric walked forward cautiously. His steps slowed as he entered the central chamber. A massive golden statue of a dwarf loomed before him, gleaming in the dim light. The sheer weight of gold was obscene. Melted down, it could fill a small riverbed. No wonder Smaug had been stunned when he first saw it. Dwarves were absurd. Still, Eric didn't touch a single coin. He knew the rules of this world. Some things, even unguarded, carried a price. The world saw, the world remembered. Some call it karma, others call it divine balance. Eric just called it not worth the trouble. Past the statue was the tunnel, the long, echoing passage that led to Smaug's lair. Eric stood at the far end, staring into the darkness. It stretched endlessly ahead, crafted with dwarven precision. Thousands of meters, most likely. He got to work. Pulling out a lava bucket, he built a tower of blocks to the ceiling, dumped the lava, then quickly followed with a water bucket. The hissing began at once. The lava cooled into a thick wall of cobblestone that blocked the entire corridor. One wasn't enough. He repeated the process. Again and again. In short order, the long hallway ended in a solid stone barricade that looked like a mountain had grown from the earth. Still, it might not hold forever. He dug into the floor and carefully placed all the TNT he had left, covered it up with stone, set the trigger mechanism. "That's the last of my stash," he sighed, dusting off his hands. "I'll fix the terrain later, promise." He glanced back at the hallway. Arrow traps were useless. Lava pits, great for zombies, not for fire-breathing dragons. Smaug would probably just treat it like a hot spring. He needed something better, something clever. He rubbed his chin, deep in thought. A voice, like burning coal and molten metal, rumbled behind him. "Are you finished, little thief?" Eric froze. His brain answered before his mouth could stop it. "Yeah, just about." Wait, that voice hadn't come from his head. A wave of heat rolled over him. Slowly, very slowly, Eric turned around. The glow of fire reflected off golden mounds far behind him. Chapter 73, The Dragon and the Spell. Whoosh, flames exploded outward, roaring through the corridor like a living tidal wave. The inferno swallowed Eric in a curtain of fire so blindingly bright. The very stone around him glowed, radiating waves of heat that made the air shimmer. Fire resistance. 7:59, his hand moved fast, drawing his sword from its sheath. With a hiss of steel as lingering tongues of flame licked at his armor. He swept the blade through the fire, carving a path as it sizzled against the heat. He gasped. The searing wind ripped the air from his lungs. Good thing he'd chugged that fire resistance potion like his life depended on it, because it absolutely did. If he'd been even a heartbeat slower, he would have been reduced to a crispy memory. Barbecued in midair, tossed like a rotisserie chicken into the sky. A deep voice echoed from the dark ahead, slow and terrible, rolling out like thunder trapped in the bones of a mountain. Oh, a human who doesn't fear flame. The tunnel groaned under pressure as a storm of wind surged forward. Eric planted his boots and steadied himself just as the beast emerged. The dragon. A monstrous shadow forced its way through the narrow passage, scales scraping stone, wings folded close but still vast. Its massive head pushed into the corridor with terrible intent. Smoke curled from its nostrils, and then it saw him. A single eye, enormous and gold, stared him down. That eye alone was bigger than his helmet. It gleamed with dark amusement. "You must be the little pest the Dark Lord mentioned," the dragon rumbled. "Do you really think that being a touch flame-resistant makes you a threat?" A low, gravelly chuckle followed, vibrating in Eric's bones. Eric's eyes flicked across the massive creature, estimating its length to be well over 100 meters. This wasn't just any dragon. This was the last fire drake of the Third Age. Smog, I